I was 21 years old when my pack decided I was more useful as a warning than as a person. They didn't kill me. They did something worse, and they made sure it happened in front of everyone. Chapter 1. The Verdict. The square smelled like damp stone, and breath held too long. I stood where they placed me, feet on the cold edge of a circle worn into the ground by past punishments. The crowd had the careful stillness of people watching a storm from behind glass. Safe enough to stare, not brave enough to help. Alpha heir Lucian Vale didn't look like a man about to ruin someone's life. He looked clean, composed. The kind of composure that only exists when the pain is not yours. The kind of composure that belongs to someone capable of the most sordid betrayal. Just by looking at him, my eyes burned as I held back tears I refused to let fall. Luna Marin Vale, the keeper of our laws, held the paper as if it weighed nothing. Elara Voss, she said, and for a heartbeat, I felt relief that my name still existed in someone's mouth. Then she continued, voice unwrinkled. By counsel, witness, and alpha authority, unfit, unproductive, unclaimable. My throat tightened. I tried to swallow, but the air wouldn't move right. I searched the faces I knew. Women who'd shared broth with me, boys who'd thrown stones with me by the creek, elders who'd once patted my head. Nobody met my eyes for more than a blink. Lucian lifted his hand, a small motion that meant the same thing as a gavel. The guard stepped behind me. Wait, I heard myself say. It came out too soft, as if my body didn't believe it deserved volume. This is a mistake. You said... Lucian's gaze met mine, and he didn't flinch. Things have changed. The words were ordinary. That was the cruelty of them. He could have shouted. He could have spat. Instead, he spoke as if he were explaining a simple accounting error. Marin nodded once, as if my life could be reduced to a line item. Bring the brand. Metal scraped stone. A rectangular iron, thick as a forearm, appeared in the guard's hands. I didn't see fire. I didn't need to. The heat rose off it in visible waves, the air shivering like it was trying to get away. My stomach flipped. My palms went wet. My body wanted to run, but my legs were already owned by the moment, by the ring of guards, by the stare of the pack, by the rule that no one spoke aloud because everyone knew it. You don't move when the council is watching. Hold her, Marin said. Hands clamped my shoulders. Another grip locked my wrists behind my back. I jerked once, a useless reflex, and the hold tightened until my joints ached. Lucian stepped closer, so close I could see the small pale scar near his lip. He smelled like smoke and cedar. Familiar, intimate, unfair. I had once thought that scent would mean safety. Don't, I said. My voice shook. I hated that. Lucian, please. His eyes flicked to my collarbone. Not my face. Not my pleading. The place they intended to turn into a label. I'm sorry, he said, and the apology was clean enough to use again. The iron touched me. At first, it was only pressure, heavy, definite, pinning me to my own skin. Then, the heat broke through like a living thing. A white-hot bite that didn't stop at the surface, that sank and sank, rewriting nerves as it went. My vision flashed bright around the edges. I didn't scream right away. My body held it back, as if silence could bargain. When the sound tore out of me, it wasn't a plea. It was a raw animal note, the kind you make when something inside you splits. The guard didn't lift the iron until the burning had time to become truth. When it finally pulled away, air hit the wound, and the pain sharpened into something cleaner and worse. I gasped hard, trying to drink relief, and got none. My collarbone throbbed like a second heart. Marin's voice cut through the noise in my skull. Let the record show. Null Omega. Erased. A book opened. I heard the scratch of a pen. That sound. Ink, moving, felt obscene. Like someone signing away a body. Stop! I tried again, because my mind kept reaching for a door. You can't. My name. You have no name here, Marin said. Lucian didn't correct her. The crowd began to murmur, not loudly, not rebelliously, just enough to feel like weather changing. I tasted iron and realized I'd bitten my tongue. They released my wrists, not out of kindness, but because I was no longer worth restraint. My arms fell to my sides, heavy and numb, and my hand drifted toward the branded place without permission. Heat radiated from it, furious and constant. I looked down. The letters were there, blistered into my skin. Nomega. Not killed me. Erased me. Marin turned away first, already done. Lucian waited one breath longer, as if he expected me to say something that would make this easier for him. I didn't give him that. A guard hooked 2 fingers into the back of my shirt and yanked me forward. My feet stumbled, then found the ground again, because falling would have been a kind of surrender, and I didn't have the strength for that. They shoved me toward the edge of the square, toward the border. The stone under my feet changed at the last marker, and the brand on my collarbone started to burn like it had just been made. They marked me permanently, but they didn't expect the moon to notice. Chapter 2. Exile under witness. They walked me out like trash that might stink up the place if left too long. No one threw anything. No one touched me. That would have been too honest. They simply parted as I passed, creating a corridor of avoidance. The space around my body felt wider than it had yesterday, like the air had learned I no longer belonged inside it. My collarbone pulsed with heat. Each heartbeat fed the burn. Sweat slid down my ribs and cooled too fast in the evening wind. At the border, the trees thinned into scrub. The ground turned rougher, less tended. A single stone post stood there, half buried, carved with the symbol that marked where protection ended. I had crossed this line before, on errands, on walks, on dares. It had never looked like a cliff. Now it did. The council had followed, not all of them, but enough to make this official. Marin stood with her paper. 2 guards waited at my back. Lucian stood just off to the side, arms folded, expression locked into something I couldn't read without hating him. Marin lifted her chin. Hear and witness. The words carried. The wind seemed to stop to listen. By null law, she continued, the branded may not cross into Pact land. The branded may not enter sanctuary. The branded may not seek shelter under any Pact roof. My throat went dry. I knew the law in the way everyone knew it, like a story told to children so they'd behave. Marin's eyes landed on me, and her voice flattened further. If you return, you will be executed immediately. No trial. A quiet sound rippled through the watchers. Not shock, not disagreement. Satisfaction, maybe. Or relief that it wasn't them. My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails biting my palms. I forced myself to breathe slowly, because panic would make me stupid, and stupidity would get me killed faster than exile. What am I supposed to do? I asked. The question sounded small out here, swallowed by open space. Marin didn't answer it like a person. She answered it like a rule. Survive or don't. It is no longer our concern. One of the guards stepped forward and pointed at the other side of the post, to the scrubland beyond. Go! I didn't move right away. My body wanted to turn, just once, just to see if anyone would stop this, if anyone would break formation and say my name like it still mattered. No one did. Lucian's gaze stayed on my collarbone, as if the brand were the only thing real about me. I stepped past the stone. The air did not change. There was no wall, no thunder, no magical barrier. Just the unbearable ordinary of being on the wrong side of a line everyone agreed existed. The guard shoved me from behind, a short push meant to remind me that even my exit was owned. I stumbled into the brush and caught myself on a thorny branch. The thorn punctured my skin, a clean, sharp sting that was nothing compared to the brand. Behind me, Marin spoke again, quieter now, to the council. It is done. Someone replied with a low murmur. Approval. Closure. I walked without looking back. My feet found a narrow path through the scrub, because paths exist even when you aren't supposed to. The sky bruised darker. The temperature dropped. My stomach cramped with hunger and shock, and the ugly realization that there would be no meal waiting, no blanket, no door. The brand throbbed beneath my shirt, hot enough to make the cloth stick to it. When I finally stopped under a cluster of stunted trees, it was because my legs started to shake in a way I couldn't hide from myself. I sat on the ground, back against rough bark, and pressed my fingers to the edges of the burn. The skin felt swollen, angry, alive. I breathed through my teeth. Okay, I whispered, not to the moon, not to fate, just to my own body. Okay, keep going. The night deepened, and the pain changed. At first, I thought it was my nerves misfiring, the burn settling into a new kind of ache. But then, a cooler sensation threaded through the heat, like water sliding under fire. The air around my collarbone felt different, charged, tight. I pulled my shirt collar down. The brand was still there, raw and brutal. But along the edges, something pale had begun to shimmer, faint as frost. My breath caught. The shimmer gathered, not spreading like infection, but arranging itself. Deliberate. Lines forming where no lines should be. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes were making stories because my mind needed hope. The pale lines didn't go away. They brightened as the moon climbed higher. Chapter 3. The Moon Mark. The first time the silver flared, I felt it in my teeth. A thin vibration ran through my jaw, through my ribs, down into the ground. The brush around me went still. Even the insects seemed to pause. I stared at my collarbone as if staring could control it. The pale lines, silver now, unmistakable, had grown over the angry red letters, not covering them entirely, but weaving across them like a second script written by a hand that didn't care about human laws. The light pulsed in time with the moon overhead, slow and certain. I didn't understand it. I didn't try to. Understanding would have been a luxury. All I knew was that I was no longer invisible. Heat rose in the air again, different from the brand's burn. It was the heat of bodies moving through brush, the scent of wolves and leather and iron. I froze. Footsteps. Not careful. Purposeful. A voice cut through the trees. There! I pulled my collar up instinctively, too late to hide anything from a nose trained for blood and fear. My heart hammered. My mouth tasted like ash. 3 figures emerged from the dark, flanking wide, as if they'd done this 100 times. Their eyes caught the silver glow at my throat and sharpened. One of them, taller, with a scar down his cheek, stopped short. His gaze locked on my collarbone as though he'd been punched. "What is that?" he said, and he didn't sound like someone asking for gossip. He sounded like someone spotting a fire where there shouldn't be one. "I don't know," I said honestly. My voice came steadier than I felt, because something in me had decided trembling wouldn't help. "I was branded today. I'm..." "Null," he finished, eyes flicking to the raw letters. His mouth twisted. "A pack threw you out." I didn't answer. The fact stood between us like a smell. The silver pulsed again, brighter, and the scarred man took one involuntary step back. The other 2 shifted their weight, suddenly wary, hands hovering near the tools at their belts. Not afraid of me, exactly. Afraid of what the mark implied, whatever it implied. The scarred man swallowed. "We need to report this." Report! The word turned my stomach. Report meant more eyes, more hands, more decisions made about me. "No," I said, the first real reaction I allowed. "Leave me. I'm already out." He looked at me like I was naive. "You don't get it." "I don't," I admitted, and my fingers dug into my palm to keep from shaking. "But I know what happens when people start making plans around my body." His gaze dropped to the brand again, then lifted to the silver, and something complicated moved behind his eyes. Disgust at what was done to me, and fear of what might be happening now. He made a choice. "On your feet," he said. I didn't move. "If you're here to kill me, do it and be done." One of the others snorted, as if I'd told a joke. "She thinks we'd waste steel on a null." The scarred man didn't laugh. He took a small set of cuffs from his belt. Dark metal, heavy, practical. "We're not killing you." Relief hit so hard it almost knocked me over. It lasted half a second. He held up the cuffs. "We're delivering you." My skin went cold beneath the silver heat. "To who?" He didn't answer the question the way a person would. He answered the way the world answers omegas it doesn't respect. "To the ones who decide what you are." The silver at my collarbone flared again, sharp enough to light the underside of the leaves. All 3 of them stared. Then the scarred man stepped forward and snapped the cuffs around my wrists. The metal was colder than the night. And the moon mark didn't dim. It brightened, like it had been waiting for a chain. They didn't drag me toward a grave. They dragged me toward a fortress, and whatever had written silver over my brand was awake enough to follow. Chapter 4. Delivered to the High Kings. The march didn't feel like travel. It felt like being relocated. They kept my wrists cuffed in front of me, not out of mercy, but because they wanted me upright and presentable when we arrived. The scarred enforcer walked close enough that if I stumbled, his hand could catch the chain and make a point of it. I learned quickly what they were afraid of. Not my strength, not my hunger, not even the fact that a pack had thrown me away like spoiled meat. They watched my collarbone. Whenever the silver pulsed, their shoulders tightened. Whenever the glow dulled, they exhaled like men given permission to breathe. By the time the trees thinned and the land rose into hard black rock, my feet were numb and my throat felt scraped raw from cold air. The sky was pale with early morning. The moon had set, but the mark held a faint sheen under my skin, like embers refusing to go out. The fortress appeared without warning, stone walls climbing from the rock as if the mountain had decided to grow teeth. Watchtowers, gatehouse, iron. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place built to keep things in. Frosthold, the scarred man said, and something in his voice shifted. Respect, maybe, or fear wearing respect's clothes. The gates opened before we reached them, not because we were expected, because someone had been watching the road the whole time. Inside, the air was colder, sharpened by stone and shadow. Voices echoed. Boots hit flagstone in disciplined rhythm. Wolves moved through corridors in human skin, eyes tracking us with the quick, assessing stare of predators, deciding whether something is prey or problem. The scarred enforcer stopped at a set of doors carved dark with age. He spoke to a guard there in a low voice I couldn't catch. The guard looked at me, then at my collarbone, and his expression tightened. The doors opened. Heat hit my face first. Firelight, smoke, a room warmed by bodies used to commanding space. I stepped into a hall that wasn't crowded, but felt full, like the air itself knew better than to drift. At the far end, 2 men stood beside a long table. Not sitting. Not at ease. Standing like they owned the ground under everyone's feet. They looked alike in ways that mattered and differed in ways that hurt. One was broader, built like a wall, dark-haired, his gaze steady and heavy as stone. When his eyes landed on me, my spine reacted before my mind did, straightening as if bracing for impact. He didn't blink. The other carried the same height, the same bone structure, but his stillness was sharper, less weight, and more blade. His eyes moved over me with a kind of cold curiosity that made me feel catalogued, not seen. Brothers! The scarred enforcer dropped to one knee. High Kings. So that was what they called them here. Not Alpha, not Lord. Something older, higher, meant to remove argument from the conversation. The broader one, Kael, my instincts named him because he felt like winter, lifted a hand. The enforcer rose. Report, Kael said. The scarred man kept his voice clipped. Null Omega from Stone Crest, branded and exiled yesterday. We found her beyond the border with an anomaly. His eyes flicked to my collarbone. The blade-still brother, Rowan, because he felt like a cut you don't notice until you bleed. tilted his head slightly. Show. My fingers curled around the edge of my torn collar. Defiance rose up in me, automatic and stupid. I wanted to say no. I wanted to keep something, anything, for myself. But I was exhausted. I was outnumbered. And the cuffs on my wrist reminded me that refusal here wouldn't be brave. It would be pointless. I pulled the fabric down. The raw brand was still angry red. The silver lines lay over it like frost webbed across fire-scorched wood. The room changed. Not in noise, in attention. Kale's eyes narrowed, not in desire, not in fascination, in calculation. Like a general seeing a new weapon on the battlefield and deciding whether to lock it away or point it at an enemy.
Rowan took one step forward.
The scarred enforcer spoke quickly, as if afraid of silence. We didn't touch it, High King. It appeared under moonlight. The mark.
Enough,
Kale said. That single word cut the enforcer off like a cord pulled tight. Kael's gaze stayed on my collarbone. Stonecrest branded her null. Yes, the enforcer said.
Erased her from registry.
Kael's mouth didn't move much, but something in his face hardened.
Convenient.
Rowan stopped a few feet from me. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. Close enough that if he wanted to hurt me, he wouldn't need to raise his voice. He didn't touch my skin. He just leaned in, slow and controlled, and breathed once near the mark. I expected disgust, pity, satisfaction. What I got was a pause so complete, it felt like the room stopped with him. Rowan's eyes unfocused for a heartbeat. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared again, as if he didn't believe what he'd just sensed and needed to confirm it. Then he went still, the way a predator goes still when it hears something in the dark that shouldn't exist. Kael watched him, and a muscle in Kael's cheek jumped once. Rowan withdrew a fraction, eyes returning to me with a new sharpness. Not softer, not kinder, more awake. Kael's voice was calm. Cage her. The word landed like a lid shutting. The scarred enforcer reached for my chain. Rowan's gaze stayed on my collarbone. He didn't argue with Kael, not out loud, but his attention held on me as if my existence had shifted from nuisance to problem. As they pulled me toward the side doors, Kael added, No one touches her without my order. Rowan's voice came quiet, almost to himself. And no one tries to read what they don't understand. I didn't know which of them that warning was for. But as the doors closed behind us, I understood the new truth Frosthold had given me in less than a minute.
Stonecrest had thrown me away as nothing.
Frosthold had looked at the same burned skin and decided I was something dangerous enough to lock up. Kael ordered the cage without looking away, but Rowan leaned close to scent me and froze like he'd found a storm breathing under my brand. Chapter 5. The Test Pit. They didn't leave me long enough to pretend the cage was temporary. The room they shoved me into wasn't a dungeon in the way stories paint dungeons. No skeletons. No dripping chains. Just stone walls, iron bars, and a bed frame bolted to the floor, like even sleep needed permission. A healer came first, accompanied by guards. She kept her face blank, eyes fixed anywhere but my collarbone. She didn't ask if it hurt. She cleaned around the burn with practiced hands. The kind of hands that had learned not to flinch at suffering because flinching wastes time. When she finished, she lifted her gaze briefly, quick as a blink, and whispered, "Don't scratch it." "As if I'd forget it's there," I said, more bitter than I meant. She tightened her mouth. "Scratching makes it worse." Then she left. An hour later, maybe 2. Time didn't behave in a cage. The guards returned. "Up," one said. I pushed to my feet with the stiffness of a body that had been marched, branded, hunted, delivered. My legs wobbled once. I steadied them. Endurance was the only thing I still owned. They led me through corridors that grew colder the deeper we went. The air smelled of wet stone and old blood. The sound of distant growls echoed like something trapped underground. We stopped at a wide archway. Beyond it, a circular pit yawned in the floor, ringed by iron railings. Chains hung from posts. Torchlight flickered along walls scratched with claw marks. The place had been used, and used often. Kael and Rowan stood at the railing, both watching the pit like men observing a map. Kael didn't look at me when I arrived. "Stonecrest claims she can't shift." Rowan's gaze flicked to my collarbone, then to my face. He didn't speak. A handler, thick-armed, wary-eyed, stepped forward with a rope. "Nulls don't shift. Nulls don't scent. Nulls don't breed. That's the point." Kael's voice was flat. "Then this will be simple." My stomach tightened. Simple for who? Kael finally turned his head. His eyes were the color of cold steel. "For the fortress. If you are what they say, you are harmless, and this ends quickly. If you are not, we find out before you become a problem we can't contain." I had been called a problem all my life in quieter ways. Too slow, too small, too weak. Today, it had become official. "What is this?" I asked, because pretending not to be afraid didn't make my heartbeat stop. Rowan answered, voice calm as a blade laid on a table. "A test." The handler jerked his chin toward the pit. "In you go!" I looked over the railing. Something moved at the bottom, a hulking shadow circling the edge where torchlight couldn't fully reach. A low growl rolled up from the darkness, vibrated through the stone, and settled under my ribs. My mouth went dry. My hands clenched. The cuffs had been removed, but not out of trust. Out of entertainment. Kael nodded once, and the handler grabbed my upper arm and pushed. The drop wasn't far enough to break bones, just far enough to jar breath from my lungs and remind me that landing didn't mean safety. I stumbled on impact, hands catching the dirt and stone floor. The pit smelled like animal heat and old fear. The shadow turned toward me. A wolf stepped into the torchlight, too large to be normal, shoulders high, fur dark as wet earth. Scars tracked one flank. Its eyes were pale, almost white, and fixed on me with a starving focus. My body screamed to run. There was nowhere to run. The walls rose smooth and high. The iron railing above was a ring of watching faces, silhouettes leaning forward. I forced myself to stand. The wolf prowled closer, slow, testing, head low. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have claws. I didn't have pack link or law or even a name that meant anything. All I had was breath and the ache in my collarbone and a silver mark I didn't understand. I held my ground anyway, because collapse was still a choice, and I wouldn't give them that one.
The wolf stopped a few feet away and bared its teeth.
My throat tightened. My mind reached for logic and found none. Then the silver at my collarbone warmed, not like the brand's burn, but like moonlight pressed into skin. The wolf's ears flicked. Its pale eyes widened slightly. It took one more step, then paused, as if held by something invisible. I didn't move. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't speak. I didn't even dare breathe too hard. The wolf lowered its head.
Not in stalking.
In submission. A hush fell over the pit above, the kind of hush that comes when an audience realizes the story has changed direction. The silver flared, bright enough that the inside of my shirt glowed. The wolf pressed its forehead to the ground. Kael's voice sounded above, controlled, but the control was new effort. Again! Rowan didn't answer. I heard the scrape of his boots on stone as he leaned forward. The wolf remained bowed. I stared at it, heart pounding, and felt something shift in my understanding. Not explanation, not comfort, just a fact settling into place. The brand hadn't erased me as completely as they'd promised. It had missed something. The feral wolf bowed its head to me like I'd been born above it, and the moon mark flared over my burned brand, as if answering a call no one else could hear. Chapter 6. A Prison Called Honor. They got me out of the pit as if I might contaminate the air. Not with disgust, with caution. 2 guards lowered a ladder. The handler reached down, offered a hand, then hesitated when my collarbone glowed faintly through the fabric. He withdrew his hand like he'd touched hot metal. I climbed on my own. Kael watched me ascend with the same expression he might wear studying a crack in a dam wall. Something small. Something that could become catastrophic if ignored. Rowan's attention held longer. Not tender, not soft. Just fixed, like he was building a pattern out of my reactions and finding pieces that didn't belong. Kael spoke to the handler. No more pits until we know what that mark does. The handler swallowed. Yes, High King. Kael's gaze cut to me. You don't leave Frosthold. As if I have somewhere to go, I said. Kael didn't react to the bitterness. You don't leave Frosthold, he repeated, and the second time it wasn't instruction. It was law. Rowan stepped closer, stopping at a careful distance. What happened at Stonecrest before they branded you? I almost laughed. It would have come out wrong. They decided I wasn't worth the food, I said. They decided I was safer as an example. Rowan's eyes narrowed. You were an example of what? Of what happens when you fail to be useful. I watched him absorb that, and for the first time since the square, I felt something like anger that wasn't only pain. Not wild rage, cold anger, the kind that makes you remember. Kael turned away. Put her under watch. A guard nodded. Where, High King? Kael's voice didn't change. In the holding wing, double lock. No visitors without my permission. Healer checks twice daily. Report any fluctuation in the mark. Rowan added, quieter. And no suppressants, until we know if they interact with it. Kael's head turned a fraction, just enough to show he'd heard. We'll decide what we use when we decide what she is. They walked away without looking back. like my existence was now a fortress problem to be managed. The guards escorted me through a different route than before. Wider corridors, fewer shadows, but no less controlled. Doors opened and shut with keys. Eyes followed me from alcoves. People paused to stare and then remembered themselves and looked away. They assigned me a handler before they locked me in again. His name was Bren, and he looked like a man who had learned that obedience keeps you alive. He didn't speak much. He kept his gaze polite, never lingering on my face, never drifting too long to my collarbone. "Food at dawn and dusk," he said as he led me into a new cell that wasn't quite a cell. A room with a window too high to reach, a wash basin, a blanket that smelled faintly of smoke. No leaving without escort, no contact with anyone without authorization. I stared at the window. "So, I'm a prisoner." Bren's jaw tightened. "You're under protection." It was almost convincing, except for the lock. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed frame and pressed my fingers carefully along the edge of the brand, feeling the raised scar tissue. The silver had dimmed now that the moon was gone, but it hadn't vanished. It lay under my skin like a thin seam of light, waiting for darkness to return. My stomach clenched with a hunger that wasn't only for food, hunger for certainty, for ground that didn't shift under me every hour. Outside my door, voices passed in the corridor. I listened without meaning to, because listening was safer than speaking. 2 men, guards by the weight of their steps.
"Did you see it?"
One murmured.
"In the pit?"
"Quiet," the other snapped, then lowered his voice anyway. "I saw. She's branded null, but that silver—" "Moon marked," the first said, almost reverent, almost afraid. "If she's moon marked, then
She can be claimed,"
the second finished. My hand froze against my collarbone. Claimed, not rescued, not welcomed, not forgiven. Claimed the way you claim territory. Claim a resource. Claim a prize. I let my fingers drop to my lap and stared at the stone floor until my breathing slowed. Stone Crest had branded me to make me unclaimable. Frosthold was already discussing the opposite. In the corridor outside my locked door, a guard whispered, "If she's moon-marked, she can be claimed," and the silver under my scarred skin warmed like it had heard him. Chapter 7. The Moon Decree. The moon rose the next night like a judge returning to the bench. I knew it before I saw it. The silver under my skin began to stir as dusk deepened, a faint tension in the air, a pressure behind my collarbone as if something inside me was waking and stretching. Bren brought food and water and tried not to look at me. He failed when the first threads of silver bled through the edge of my collar. His hand tightened on the tray. "Don't move!" "I'm sitting," I said. He swallowed and backed out, locking the door as if the lock mattered to whatever was happening in my blood. The silver brightened steadily with the dark. It didn't hurt like the brand. It didn't burn. It warmed, and the warmth felt wrong in its calmness, like being watched by something that didn't blink. Footsteps came, more than 2. Keys. A murmur of voices controlled into a low hum. The door opened, and Kyle entered first, with Rowan half a step behind. 2 guards followed, then stopped at the threshold like they didn't want to cross into the room. Kael's gaze went straight to my collarbone. "Show me." I didn't argue. Arguing in a locked room is theater for the person with keys. I pulled the collar down. The brand letters were still visible, but the silver had grown bolder than before, lines spreading outward like a pattern being completed. It shimmered in the torchlight and then answered the moon's pull with a sudden bright pulse. Rowan's nostrils flared. He didn't lean in this time. He didn't need to. Whatever he'd sensed yesterday, he sensed more clearly now. Kael's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders tightened. "It's stronger." "It's responding," Rowan said softly, and for the first time, his voice carried something like caution that wasn't for me. For the mark. For what it represented, even if he didn't know what that was. Kael turned his head slightly toward one of the guards.
"Bring the council riders!"
The guard blinked.
"High King, this is internal!"
Kael's eyes cut to him. The guard went rigid. "Yes, High King." Kael looked back at me. "Stonecrest made you a problem they didn't want to own." I stared at him. "They made me nothing." Kael's mouth set. "They failed." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were kind, because they were factual, and facts were more dangerous than comfort. Rowan stepped forward, careful, as if approaching a fire. "You said it appeared after the branding." "Yes," I said. "Under the moon." Kael's voice was the sound of a door shutting. "Then the moon decides it matters." Rowan's eyes flicked to Kael. "Or it decides she matters." Kael didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He turned away from the sentiment entirely and spoke like a ruler making a decree for a fortress, not a person. "This cannot remain hidden," he said. "Not in Frosthold, not in any pack. If this spreads, others will come. Some will come to claim. Some will come to kill. Either way, we will not be surprised." My throat tightened. "So what happens to me?" Kael faced me again, and I felt, for the first time in this place, the full force of being seen by someone who could end me without raising a hand. "What happens," he said, "is that you are verified." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Neutral ground?" Kael nodded once. "A moon trial. 30 days. The number landed in my chest like a stone. 30 days to live in a fortress that had already put me behind locks. 30 days to be watched as if I were a weapon with a faulty safety. "And if I refuse?" I asked, because fear demanded I find the edge of the trap. Kael's answer was immediate. "You won't." Rowan's gaze held mine, and his voice was quieter, almost flat. "If you don't submit, they'll call you an uncontrolled anomaly. That gives them permission to put you down. Put you down like an animal, like a mistake." My fingers curled around the fabric at my chest. The brand throbbed beneath the silver, the old pain and the new warmth layered together, neither erasing the other. I didn't have rebellion in me. Not yet. Not in a world where a rule could make my death lawful. But I had something else now, something colder and steadier. Endurance. I lifted my chin. 30 days, I repeated, not as agreement, but as acknowledgement of the cage's dimensions. Kael watched me for a long moment, as if deciding whether I would break under that number.
You will be monitored. You will be escorted. You will not leave Frosthold without my authorization,
Rowan added.
and you will not be handled like a thing.
Kael's eyes flicked to him.
We will handle what we must.
Rowan didn't move.
We will not create the very threat we fear.
For a heartbeat, the air between the brothers tightened. Power meeting power, not affection. Then Kael looked away as if the matter was decided by his silence. They turned to leave. At the door, Kael paused without looking back. Eat, rest, survive. Rowan's gaze lingered on my collarbone one last time, and something unreadable crossed his face, like recognition without explanation. Then he followed Kael out, and the locks clicked behind them. The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as the first night. This quiet had edges. I sat back down on the bed frame, hands in my lap, and stared at the silver lines glowing faintly against the raw brand. Stonecrest had tried to make the brand a full stop. But under the moon, it didn't look like an ending. It looked like a seal slapped over something unfinished. I pressed my fingertips lightly to the raised letters and felt the silver warmth pulse beneath them, steady as a second heartbeat. Whatever the mark was, it hadn't come to comfort me. It had come because the brand wasn't complete. And if the brand wasn't complete, then neither was their verdict. I didn't need to understand the silver to use it. I only needed to stay alive and stay quiet, until the moon forced the world to admit my brand was unfinished. Chapter 8. Conditioning. The next morning, Bren arrived with 2 guards and a woman I hadn't seen before. She wore a plain wool coat that didn't match the fortress uniforms. Her hands were clean. Her eyes were not gentle, the kind of eyes that could measure a wound without flinching because the wound was never the point.
Sit,
she said, as if I were a chair she intended to use. I stayed standing. The room felt smaller with 4 bodies in it, and my window let in a strip of gray light that made everything look harder.
Why?
For everyone's safety, Bren said, voice tight. The woman's gaze went to my collarbone, where the silver lay quiet under my skin.
We're beginning a regimen.
I almost laughed.
A regimen.
As if I'd wandered into a clinic with a mild problem and not been hauled here in cuffs because the moon had written something over the brand that should have ended me.
What kind?
I asked. She lifted a small vial, glass clear enough to show the liquid inside. Colorless. Harmless looking. Then she held up a needle like punctuation. My stomach dipped. My body remembered the iron. No, I said. It wasn't rebellion. It was instinct. The kind that keeps you alive. Kael's shadow moved in the doorway behind them. He hadn't been there a moment ago. Or he had, and I hadn't heard him, which was worse. He stepped into the room as if it belonged to him and glanced at the vial without interest. Do it. Rowan followed a breath later, leaning against the doorframe like he'd come to observe, not command. His gaze landed on my face first, then slid to the place my collar hid. Kael's eyes stayed on me. This is Frosthold. We don't wait to see what a danger becomes. I'm not a danger, I said, because the words were there, because some stubborn part of me wanted them said aloud. Kael's expression barely shifted.
That is not your decision to make.
Rowan's mouth tightened faintly. Not sympathy. A reaction to Kael's certainty, maybe. Or to the fact that my body was being treated like a loose weapon that needed its trigger filed down. The woman moved in, efficient, already reaching for my arm. I stepped back until my calves hit the bed frame. My fingers curled on the rough blanket. "If you want it in me," I said, making my voice as even as I could, "tell me what it is." The woman looked to Kael, waiting for his permission to answer. Kael gave none. "A suppressant. It dampens volatility." Volatility. That was what he called me now. Not Elara, not null. A condition. Rowan's eyes narrowed. She asked what it is. Kael's gaze flicked to him, brief as a knife turning. And I answered what she needs to know. The woman caught my wrist and turned my arm. Her grip wasn't cruel, but it was practiced, certain that resistance was pointless. I tried not to jerk away. Not because I accepted this, but because I'd learned the difference between wasting strength and keeping it.
The needle bit.
Cold spread under my skin, quick and invasive. It wasn't like the brand's burn. It was like something sliding into a place inside me that I hadn't known had a door. For a moment, my senses sharpened in panic. The smell of stone, the iron in the guards' belts, Rowan's faint smoke and snow scent, Kael's colder, darker one. Then the world softened at the edges. Not sleep, not fog, more like distance. My heartbeat slowed without my permission. My muscles loosened, as if my body had been told it could stop bracing. I hated it. The woman withdrew the needle and dabbed my skin. "Daily," she said, as if discussing meal schedules. "At the same hour." "I'm not a prisoner," I said to Kael, because my mouth was still mine even if my blood was not. Kael looked at my collarbone. "Yes," he said, voice calm. "You are." Rowan pushed off the doorframe and came a step closer, eyes scanning me. "How does it feel?" "Like you've put your hand over my mouth," I said, and my own voice sounded slightly far away, like it belonged to someone else. Kael's gaze didn't waver.
Good.
Rowan's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. Not yet. He merely watched, and I could feel him taking note of every small change the suppressant forced on me. As if he wanted to remember the exact shape of what Kael was doing. The door shut behind them, the guards following, Bryn last. I sat on the bed frame because my legs had decided they no longer needed to obey me with the same urgency. I pressed my fingers to my wrist where the needle had gone in and listened to the quiet inside my chest. The silver under my collarbone was there, but distant. Like a heartbeat heard through a wall. That night, when the moon rose, I expected the same warm pressure that always came with darkness. I expected the silver to wake. It did, but not the way it should have. At first, the suppressant held, my limbs heavy, my thoughts slow, my senses dulled like cloth stuffed into my ears. Then moonlight hit the stone through the high window, and something in the silver pushed back. The warmth grew. The pressure built. The edges of the world sharpened again, the way a blade sharpens when the whetstone finally catches. I sat up, breath catching. The silver flared beneath my skin like a living thing refusing a cage, And in the middle of that flare, I felt it, clear as a hand on my throat. Whatever they'd injected into me could dim me in daylight. Under the moon, it couldn't hold. The suppressants dragged my body into quiet all day. Then moonlight touched my scar, and the silver woke anyway, sharp and unstoppable.
Chapter 9. 2 Kings, 2 Threats. They adjusted their routine after that. Not because they admitted anything. Kael didn't admit to mistakes. He simply changed the shape of the cage and called it wisdom. The next morning, the woman with the vial returned at the same hour. This time, Kael stood closer, watching my face like he expected me to lunge. Rowan wasn't there. I held out my arm before they could grab it. Not submission. Strategy. If I made them fight me for it every day, they'd treat me like something they could justify breaking. The needle went in. The cold spread. The distance returned. Kael watched my collarbone, as if he could see the silver through fabric by force of will. We'll increase the dose. You already saw it doesn't work at night, I said, voice controlled, because control was the only power I could still practice in plain sight. It works enough, Kael replied. Enough to keep you predictable. Predictable. That was his goal. To make me something he could manage with numbers and schedules and locks. When he left, Bren remained, hovering in the doorway with a discomfort he couldn't hide. What? I asked. He glanced down the corridor. High King Rowan wants you escorted. To where? Bren swallowed. The archive hall. That surprised me more than the needle. Archives meant records. Records meant names. Records meant the kind of truth Stonecrest had tried to erase. Bren led me through the fortress with 2 guards behind us. The suppressant made my limbs feel slightly heavier, my thoughts slower to leap, but it didn't make me docile. It just made me more careful about where I spent energy. The archive hall smelled of dust and ink and old leather. Rows of shelves rose to a ceiling lost in shadow. A few scribes worked at long tables, heads down, pretending they couldn't hear footsteps. Rowan stood near a window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned when I entered, gaze cutting to my collarbone, as if he could see the silver through cloth. Then his eyes lifted, meeting mine. Leave us, he said to Bren and the guards. Bren hesitated. High King! Rowan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Leave! They withdrew, the door closing with a solid click that reminded me privacy here was another form of control. Rowan gestured toward a chair across from him. Sit. I didn't. If Kael finds out you brought me here... He already knows, Rowan said, and the calmness in his tone made my stomach tighten. He agreed because it's productive, not because he trusts me. I watched him carefully. He was not offering kindness. Kindness didn't survive in rooms like this. He was offering something else, attention, sharpened into purpose. What do you want? I asked. Rowan's gaze flicked to my wrist, the small bruise where the needle had gone in. He's pushing the suppressants harder. So you noticed, I said. I notice what matters. The words were simple, but the way he said them made my throat tighten. Not with desire, with the uneasy awareness that being noticed by a High King could be as dangerous as being ignored. Rowan stepped closer, stopping at that careful distance again. Show me the mark. I hesitated. Then I tugged the collar down, just enough to expose the silver threading over the raw letters. Rowan didn't touch me. He leaned in slightly, head tilting, eyes narrowing as if he were trying to read a language that refused to sit still. "You freeze every time you scent it," I said before I could stop myself. His gaze lifted to mine, sharp. "I don't freeze." "You did," I said, and kept my voice even. "When I first arrived." Rowan's mouth tightened. He looked away for a fraction of a second, then back to the mark. "It's wrong." Wrong how? The question rose in me, eager and dangerous, because wanting answers could make you careless. I kept my breathing slow. Rowan's voice lowered. "Kale thinks the mark makes you a threat. He will try to control you until there's nothing left to react." "And you?" I asked. Rowan's gaze slid to my face again. "I think Stonecrest branded you for a reason, and I don't trust their fear." My chest tightened at the mention of Stonecrest. I didn't let it show. Rowan turned slightly toward the shelves. "Kael is power. He builds cages. He calls them protection." "And you build what?" I asked. Rowan's eyes returned, and for the first time, I saw the other kind of danger in him. One that didn't crush, but cut. "Leverage." I didn't flinch. "Over me?" "Over the situation," Rowan corrected. "Over the people who will come when they hear a moon mark exists in Frosthold." He watched my face as if expecting me to argue. I didn't. I didn't have the luxury of pretending I was beyond being used. Rowan's voice stayed controlled. "You are caught between two threats, Elara. Kael will do what he believes is necessary. Others will do what they want." My fingers curled slightly at my sides. "And you're different?" Rowan's gaze flicked to my collarbone again. "I'm honest about it." The room felt colder for that honesty. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and drew out a small folded paper, thin, worn, as if it had been handled too often. He held it out, not close enough to touch my hand, but close enough that I could take it if I chose. "What is that?" I asked. "A record request," Rowan said. "Old, restricted, the kind Kael won't approve because it makes his life harder." I didn't take it. "Why are you giving it to me?" Rowan's eyes held mine. "Because I want you to help me read the mark." My stomach dipped. "I don't know what it means." "I know," Rowan said. "That's the point. You're the one it's on. You react to it before anyone else can." He leaned closer, just slightly, and his scent hit me. Smoke and cold air. The kind of scent that makes your body remember it has a pulse. The suppressant tried to dull the reaction. It didn't erase it. It simply made it quieter, and that quietness felt more intimate than heat. Rowan's voice dropped. "Help me understand it, and I'll stop Kael from breaking you." My breath caught. Not because I trusted him, but because the offer was a knife held by the handle instead of the blade. I stared at the folded paper, then at Rowan's face. Between Kael's certainty and Rowan's precision, I felt the shape of Frosthold's cage change. Chapter 10. Proof the brand is wrong. I didn't take Rowan's paper in front of him.
Not because I was brave. Because I was learning. Men like Cale and Rowan didn't offer things without cost, and the cost was easier to pay when you understood the numbers. "I'll think about it," I said. Rowan's gaze sharpened as if he wanted to push. Then he nodded once. "Good. Thinking keeps you alive." He didn't press the paper into my hand. He set it on the table between us, flat and deliberate. Then he stepped back, giving me space that felt like its own kind of trap. Bryn returned with the guards, and the escort moved again. As they led me out of the archive hall, I glanced back once. Rowan hadn't moved from the window. He watched me leave like someone watching a door he'd just unlocked, waiting to see if the thing behind it would walk through. Back in my room, I waited. I ate the food Bryn brought, because refusing meals in a fortress wasn't protest. It was self-destruction. I slept when my body allowed it, because exhaustion made you careless. And when the corridor grew quiet, I listened. Frosthold had servants, quiet hands that carried linen and washed floors and kept fires fed. People the High Kings rarely looked at, because power trains itself not to see the labor that makes it comfortable. On the third day of suppressants, a young maid came to replace my wash basin. She kept her eyes down, lips pressed tight, trying to move quickly enough that my presence wouldn't touch her. She paused when she saw the bruise on my wrist. Her gaze flicked up, then down again. "They're dosing you," she whispered. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer immediately. I studied her hands, raw knuckles, small cuts, the faint stain of ink along one finger. She worked near records, or near people who did. "What's your name?" I asked softly. Fear flashed across her face. "It doesn't matter." It mattered to me. Names were what they had taken. Names were what I refused to treat as disposable. "It matters," I said. Her mouth tightened. "Tessa." I nodded once. "Tessa, do you want trouble?" Her eyes widened slightly. "No." "Then don't bring it," I said. "But if you hear something useful, if you see something you think I should know, you can decide whether to leave it somewhere I'll find it." Tessa froze, basin in her hands. "I'm not asking you to risk your life," I added, because I meant it. "I'm asking you to notice what you already notice and choose what you do with it." Tessa swallowed hard. Then she nodded once, small and fast, and hurried out like the walls themselves were listening. That night, after moonrise, the silver warmed under my skin, and my thoughts sharpened against the suppressant's dulling. I sat at the edge of the bed frame and thought about Rowan's paper on the archive table. Not his offer. The paper. A request. Restricted. The kind of thing a servant could move without drawing attention if it looked like routine. My door opened the next day for my escorted walk. 10 minutes down a corridor and back. A cruel imitation of freedom meant to keep my body functional. As Bryn guided me past a side passage near the archive wing, I slowed just a fraction. A cart stood there, stacked with folded linens meant for the scribes, clean cloth to protect books, to blot ink, to wipe dust from history. A careless thing in a fortress full of careful rules. Tessa stood beside it, head lowered, hands moving fast. She didn't look up when I passed, but her fingers slipped something small between two folded cloths on the top of the stack. My heart kicked once. I didn't react. Endurance over reaction. I kept walking, kept my face blank. Let Bren talk about nothing as if he needed the sound to remind himself he was doing his job. When I returned to my room, Bren left. The lock clicked. An hour later, the cart came. A different servant brought linens, eyes fixed on the floor. They set the folded stack on my bed frame and left without a word, as if even speaking might link them to my existence. I waited until footsteps faded. Then I unfolded the top cloth. A thin slip of paper fell into my palm. My breath caught. Ink, tight and precise. A copied entry, not an original. That was smart. Originals were guarded. Copies could be explained away as mistakes. I read the lines twice before they settled into meaning. A brand ledger reference. Not Stonecrest's. Older. Regional. And beside the description of a lawful null brand, a note. Iron composition regulated. Seal required. Council witness must include a registered brand smith. Below that, in smaller writing, a line that made my stomach go cold. Counterfeit null brands identified in border packs. Purpose. Political erasure. Punishment. Capital. My fingers tightened until the paper crinkled. Stonecrest had branded me with something meant to look official. Something meant to end me. But if this was true, then the brand on my collarbone wasn't only cruelty. It was evidence. The room felt suddenly too small. Not because I was trapped, but because my mind had started moving faster than the walls. I stared at the silver threading over the raw letters, faint in daylight, and understood a new and dangerous thing. They hadn't just cast me out. They had committed a crime to do it, and crimes leave trails. I tucked the paper into the seam of my mattress, deep where a casual search wouldn't find it. Then I sat very still, letting the quiet anger settle into something sharper. I had proof the brand was wrong. But proof meant nothing if the wrong people held it. I needed someone with authority to validate it, someone whose word could turn a null into a scandal. Kyle could. Rowan might. And neither would do it without turning me into a tool first. The copied ledger note in my hand made my scar feel different. Less like a verdict, more like evidence. And I realized the null brand wasn't law. It was counterfeit. Chapter 11. The Stonecrest Envoy. They didn't tell me Stonecrest had arrived. They simply changed the air in the corridors. More guards at corners, doors shut where they'd usually stay open, servants moving faster with their eyes down. Bren stopped speaking entirely on my escorted walk, like words might be counted against him. When he brought me food that afternoon, he didn't set the tray down right away. He stood with it in his hands, staring at the floor. "What is it?" I asked. Bren's throat bobbed. "You're to be presented." The word made my skin tighten. "To who?" He hesitated too long, and I didn't need his answer anymore. "Stonecrest." My collarbone warmed under the cloth, a faint pulse, as if the silver could taste my fear. They brought me to the great hall, not the pit, not the archive wing, the place Kyle used when he wanted witnesses without calling it a spectacle. Torches lined the walls. The table at the far end held no food, only a neat spread of papers and seals. Kyle stood behind it, hands braced on the edge like the hall itself needed anchoring. Rowan was to his right, posture loose but eyes hard, as if he'd chosen the role of stillness so no one could read which way he leaned. Between them, and me stood 3 strangers in stone crest colors. Not elders, not council. An envoy. A messenger meant to carry official words without carrying responsibility. At the center was a man I recognized before he lifted his chin. Lucian's second, Garrick. He had the same careful composure Lucian wore, the same habit of looking through people when they were inconvenient. His gaze hit my collarbone immediately, and for a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, then calculation. I held my face blank and kept my hands folded in front of me the way Bryn had instructed. I understood the purpose now, not comfort, control. My body arranged as evidence, my silence demanded as proof of obedience. Kael spoke first. "State your business." Garrick bowed with just enough respect to be correct. "Stonecrest acknowledges Frosthold's authority. We come under seal with a request." Rowan's voice cut in, mild as ice. "Requests aren't delivered with guards." Garrick didn't look at him. "We were advised the subject might be unstable." Subject. My fingers tightened together until the knuckles ached. I didn't move. Endurance, not reaction. Kael's gaze didn't leave Garrick. "You refer to Elara Voss." Garrick's lips tightened. "The individual formerly known by that name. Stonecrest's record no longer recognizes her." The words were delivered smoothly, like a legal phrase polished by repetition. Like erasing me was an administrative decision, not a wound. My throat tried to close. I opened it again with a slow breath. I stared at a point on the wall just beyond Garrick's shoulder and refused to blink. Rowan shifted his weight, the smallest movement, but I felt it like a change in temperature. "You erased her record, branded her, exiled her, and now you're here, speaking as if she's a loose item misplaced on a road." Garrick finally turned his eyes to Rowan. "Stonecrest acted under its lawful rights." Kael's mouth twitched, barely. "Lawful." Garrick reached into his coat and drew out a sealed letter. The wax bore Stonecrest's mark. He held it out with both hands. Kael didn't take it. Bryn stepped forward instead, accepted the letter, and brought it to the table. Kael broke the seal with one decisive motion and read. I watched his eyes move across the page. His expression stayed controlled, but a vein near his temple tightened slightly, like something under the skin resisted. Rowan watched Kael, not the letter. Kael lifted his gaze. "You want her returned." Garrick's chin rose a fraction. "For final judgment." My stomach dropped, not because I feared judgment. I'd already been judged, because I understood what final meant in a mouth like Stonecrest's. Not correction, not review. Disposal. Kael set the letter down on the table with measured care. "She is in Frosthold custody." Garrick spread his hands, a gesture meant to look reasonable. "Then we ask Frosthold to respect the original ruling and return the null to the Pact that branded her." Rowan's eyes turned to me briefly, as if checking whether I could keep standing. Then he looked back at Garrick. "You branded her null to make her unclaimable." Garrick's composure didn't crack. "Nulls are unclaimable by nature." I felt the silver under my collarbone stir, faint and restless, as if it disliked the sentence. Kael's voice lowered, dangerous in its calm. "And yet you traveled here, because she is no longer convenient to ignore." Garrick hesitated for the first time. The slip was small, almost invisible, but I saw it. He swallowed it quickly and replaced it with polish.
Stonecrest's Alpha Heir,
He said, and the title made the hall feel smaller.
sent his own words for you, High King.
He reached into his coat again and produced a second piece of paper. Unsealed this time. Meant to be read aloud. Meant to carry a voice into a room without requiring the speaker to face consequences. Garrick cleared his throat.
From Lucian Vale.
My heartbeat thudded once, heavy. Garrick read, voice steady.
Return the branded null to Stonecrest for final judgment. Her existence is a destabilizing factor. She is not a person under law. Do not shelter what we have erased.
He lowered the paper. His eyes slid to my collarbone again, a quick dart like a man looking at a wound he'd caused and wanting to know if it festered. Kyle didn't look at me. He looked at Garrick.
You've delivered your message.
Garrick bowed again, a fraction deeper this time.
We await Frosthold's compliance.
Rowan's voice came soft, almost conversational.
And if Frosthold refuses?
Garrick's smile was thin.
Then Stonecrest will consider Frosthold in violation of Pact Accord. Certain responses may follow.
A threat wrapped in etiquette. Kael's eyes went cold enough to make torches feel dim.
Leave.
Garrick opened his mouth, likely to protest. Then he stopped, sensing something in Kael's tone that wasn't up for negotiation. He bowed and backed away with his two escorts, footsteps measured, pride intact, fear hidden. When the doors shut behind them, the hall remained silent for one long breath.
Kael's hand flattened on the table, fingers splayed as if keeping something contained. Then he spoke without looking at me. You will not be returned,
he said. The words should have relieved me. They did, a little. Then he added,
not because you deserve mercy, because you are now Frosthold's responsibility. Property, dressed as protection.
Rowan's gaze held on the closed doors.
Stonecrest is trying to bury a mistake.
Kael's eyes narrowed.
Or prevent a problem.
Rowan looked at me again, and for a flicker of a second, his expression sharpened into something that wasn't pity and wasn't softness. Something like recognition that I was standing in the middle of other people's war. Bryn touched my elbow.
Come.
I let him guide me away, because standing my ground in a hall full of power wasn't strength. It was performance, and performance would get me punished. As we walked back through the corridor, Lucian's words repeated in my head, precise and final. Not a person under law. The brand beneath my collarbone warmed, and the silver threaded over it answered with a pulse that felt almost like refusal. Lucian's message followed me all the way back to my locked room. Send her back for final judgment, and the silver under my scar flared once, sharp as a warning.
Chapter 12. Court of Wolves.
They fed the fortress that night like nothing had happened. I knew because the smell reached my room long before anyone opened my door. Roasted meat, herbs, smoke, sweet bread, celebration scents, the kind meant to soothe a population into believing their rulers had everything handled. Bryn arrived in the late afternoon with a bundle of fabric over one arm.
Put this on,
he said. I stared at the cloth. It was a dress, not fine, but clean, the color dark enough to hide stains. A garment chosen for display, not comfort.
I'm not hungry, I said.
Bryn's mouth tightened.
It isn't about hunger.
Of course it wasn't. 2 guards waited in the corridor.
They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said the same thing the locks always said. You are going because we decided you will. I changed without argument because I was learning to save my arguments for moments when they bought something real. They escorted me to the great hall again, but this time it was transformed. A long table filled the center. Platters steamed, cups glinted. Wolves in human skins sat shoulder to shoulder, voices rising in controlled laughter. This was not a pack gathering. This was court. Kael sat at the head, posture straight, expression unreadable. Rowan sat beside him, one arm resting along the chair like he might rise at any moment. Around them were officers, captains, neighboring leaders, faces I didn't know but could read by the way others angled their bodies toward them. When the doors opened and I stepped in, the room shifted. It wasn't silence, not fully. It was the way sound changes when a knife is placed on a table, conversation continuing, but thinner, more cautious. Eyes turned, sense shifted. The whole room registered me as something that didn't belong among food and warmth. Kael didn't stand. He didn't announce me. He simply lifted his hand, and an empty space near the far end of the table was cleared with efficient speed.
Sit, he said.
I walked to the seat without rushing, without dragging. I kept my chin level. I sat where I was told. The chair felt too large, or I felt too small inside it. I couldn't tell which. A servant placed a plate before me. Meat, bread, a cup of water. Nourishment offered the way you offer hay to a horse you've bought. Maintenance, not kindness. Kael's voice carried down the table.
You will not speak unless addressed.
My throat tightened. I nodded once. The conversation resumed with forced ease. I sat in a pocket of attention that kept circling back like a tongue worrying a sore tooth. A man across from me, broad, older, with scars on his hands, leaned slightly toward his neighbor and spoke in a murmur meant to be heard.
A branded null at Frosthold's table, he said. Kael's collecting strays now?
Soft laughter answered. My fingers curled under the table. The silver under my collarbone warmed faintly, responding to the press of eyes, the weight of judgment. It didn't flare. It never flared without moonlight, but it stirred like a nerve. I forced my shoulders to stay loose. I lifted my fork. I ate, not because my appetite existed, because refusing food would have been interpreted, and I was tired of being interpreted. Someone at the near end of the table asked Kael about Crest. I caught only fragments. Envoy, accord, response. Then a name, Lucian, spoken as if it were a small inconvenience, not a blade. Kael replied with sentences so measured they could have been carved in stone. He never raised his voice. The room followed his control like a current. Rowan spoke less, but when he did, others leaned in. His words were fewer and sharper, and people listened as if they didn't want to miss the exact edge. I kept my eyes on my plate, until a new voice, younger, hungrier, cut down the table. Does it obey? Laughter rippled again, softer this time, because it was closer to cruelty. Closer to truth. My jaw tightened. I kept chewing. Kael's gaze slid toward me, not to check on my dignity, but to measure how I might react. His control was always about outcomes. Rowan's eyes landed on the speaker.
Are you asking if she's a dog?
The younger man chuckled, but the sound came strained.
I'm asking if she's dangerous.
Rowan's gaze moved to my collarbone, hidden under the neckline.
If she were,
you'd feel it. The room went quieter, not because they believed him, but because some part of them did.
I swallowed, kept breathing. And then I noticed something odd. Not in the table, not in the talk, but in the bodies. Whenever my breath deepened, the men nearest me shifted unconsciously, their chests rising a beat later. When I exhaled slowly to calm my stomach, the woman to my left mirrored it, as if relieved to find a rhythm to follow.
It happened again and again, subtle enough that no one would call it out, obvious enough that once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. A ripple through shoulders, a synchronized ease.
I didn't understand it. I didn't attach meaning. I simply watched the pattern and tested it.
I slowed my breathing deliberately. Long inhale, longer exhale, without moving any other part of me.
The air around the table changed. Not visibly, but the tension in the shoulders closest to me eased by a fraction. Conversation smoothed. The sound of cutlery softened. The younger man who'd asked if I obeyed leaned back, expression shifting from mockery to faint confusion, as if his own body had decided to relax against his will. My pulse sped, then steadied. I kept my face blank, kept eating, kept breathing. Under my collarbone, the silver warmed faintly, like an ember answering a bellows. The feast ended without Kael dismissing me like a person. Bryn arrived like an accessory, ready to escort me back to my room. As I stood, the room's attention shifted away, relieved to return to safer topics. Rowan's gaze followed me for a moment, thoughtful, sharp.
Kael didn't look at me at all.
In the corridor, my hands shook slightly, not from fear, not only. From the strange new realization that something in me could move a room without touching it. As the hall's laughter thinned behind me, I realized it wasn't only silence that kept me alive. My breathing had pulled hostile bodies into rhythm, and they hadn't even noticed. Chapter 13. The Omega Network. After the feast, they tightened the rules. Not dramatically. Kael didn't do dramatic. He did incremental pressure until something either held or cracked. My escorted walks became shorter. The guards changed shifts more often. The woman with the vial increased the dose exactly as Kael promised. In daylight, the suppressants made my body feel borrowed. My emotions didn't vanish. They simply moved farther away, like voices behind a closed door. At night, under the moon, the silver pushed back. Not with pain, with clarity.
It was on the fourth night after the feast that the fortress healer came again.
Her name was Celine. Bryn had said it once. Careful, like names were dangerous. She entered with a small lamp and a bundle of clean cloth. No guards this time, but I could feel them outside the door like weight. Celine sat on the edge of the bed frame without asking and gestured for me to lower my collar.
I did. The brand was healing into a hard ridge.
The silver lines had grown more intricate, threading outward in patterns that didn't look like decoration. They looked like intention. Celine cleaned the skin around it with a damp cloth, hands steady.
Does it itch?
Sometimes, I said. Does it pull?
Yes.
Celine made a small sound in her throat. Approval, perhaps. Good. I stared at her. Good?
She didn't look up. Healing is good. Pain is information. That was the most kindness she'd offered me, and it wasn't kindness so much as practical truth.
When she finished, she set the cloth aside.
Hold still. She pressed 2 fingers lightly below the mark, checking for heat. Swelling, something only healers noticed. The silver warmed under her touch. Celine's hand stilled. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The lamp flame flickered, and the shadows shifted across the wall like listening faces. Celine withdrew her fingers slowly, as if she'd placed them on a living animal. Her gaze lifted to mine, and for the first time since I'd met her, her eyes were not blank. They were alert, almost wary. "You've been talking to the servants," she said quietly. It wasn't accusation. It was a statement of fact, the way she'd said, "Pain is information." My throat tightened. This was the moment a careless answer could crush someone like Tessa under the wheels. "I've been existing near them," I said carefully. "That tends to be called talking." Celine's mouth twitched, the smallest hint of a smile that vanished as quickly as it came. "Careful, Elara." She said my name like she hadn't been allowed to say it until now. I kept my face neutral. "Why?" Celine glanced toward the door, as if measuring how well sound traveled through stone. "Because Kael will break what he can't understand. And Rowan will use it," I said. Celine's gaze sharpened. "Yes." The agreement sat between us, heavy. I realized then that Celine was not simply a healer. She was a person who saw how power moved through a fortress and survived by stepping aside at the right moments. I lowered my voice. "What do you want?" Celine hesitated. Then she reached into her pocket and drew out a folded scrap of paper. Small, plain, the kind used to note rations or shift schedules. She placed it on the bed frame beside my knee. "Names?" she said. "Not yours, others." I stared at it. Celine's eyes held mine. "There are Omegas in this fortress who don't belong to anyone, not truly. Some were traded, some were taken, some were born into cages they can't see because the bars were always there." My fingers twitched toward the paper, then stopped. "If I take that, you'll be watched more closely," Celine finished. "And if they think you're organizing, you'll be labeled an instigator." The word landed hard. Instigator, the kind of label that made punishment feel justified. I kept my hand still. "So why are you giving it to me?" Celine's gaze flicked to my collarbone. The silver shimmered faintly in the lamplight, quiet and patient. Her voice dropped until it was almost a breath. "Because I've seen brands. I've seen blessings. I've seen marks that fade." She leaned closer, just enough that only I could hear the next words. "That mark didn't land on you by accident," she whispered. "It chose you on purpose." My stomach tightened, not with comfort, but with weight. Choice implied responsibility. Choice implied consequences. Celine straightened, the blank healer mask sliding back into place. "Eat when you can. Sleep when you can. Don't scratch it." Then she stood and went to the door, opening it as if our conversation had been nothing but wound care. I waited until her footsteps faded before I reached for the paper. Inside were names and work routes, nothing dramatic. Laundry wing, kitchen, archive dusting, night patrol sweep times, ordinary veins of the fortress.
A map for someone who had learned to survive by being overlooked. I folded it back up and hid it with the copied ledger note in the mattress seam. Building a quiet, invisible hoard of leverage. Outside my window, moonlight slid down the stone. The silver under my scar warmed, steady as breath. For the first time, I understood that staying alive wasn't only about enduring what they did to me. It was about noticing who else was enduring. And choosing what to do with that knowledge without letting the fortress see the choice being made. Celine's whisper stayed with me long after she left. That mark, it chose you on purpose. And the list of names in my mattress seam began to feel like the first threads of something I could build. Chapter 14. The Command Slip. Kale stopped pretending the mark was a mystery and started treating it like a weapon that needed a leash. He didn't announce it. He simply changed the way the fortress moved around me, more eyes in doorways, more footsteps that paused outside my room at night, more checks that were really counts. Even Celine's visits shortened, her hands brisk and her lamp kept low, as if light itself might be accused of aiding me. Rowan appeared less, but when he did, it was with a sharpness that made the air feel thinner, as if he'd been thinking in private and returned with a decision already shaped. On the 7th night after Stonecrest's envoy, my door opened just after dusk. Not Bryn, Kael. He entered with Rowan and 2 guards who stayed outside, their shadows long against the corridor wall. Kael's gaze went straight to my collarbone, as if he could see the silver through cloth and bone. Rowan's eyes found my face first, then softened into concentration, the way they did when he listened for something beneath words. "Get up," Kael said. I rose without asking why. It wasn't obedience. It was choosing where to spend strength. They took me down into a small chamber I hadn't seen before. Stone walls, a single table, 2 chairs, and a faint scent of iron in the air. A place meant for decisions made quietly, where witnesses were a choice, not an accident. Kael nodded at the chair opposite him. "Sit." I sat. Rowan remained standing, slightly behind Kael's shoulder, near enough to hear, far enough to suggest he wasn't following orders so much as monitoring what Kael would do with them. Kael placed a small vial on the table. Not the usual one. This glass was darker, the liquid inside faintly cloudy. My stomach tightened. "What's that?" "A stronger suppressant," Kael said. Rowan's posture shifted. "You've already increased the dose." Kael didn't look at him. "And it still flares under the moon." Rowan's gaze cut to my collarbone. "Because it's not a normal response." Kael's mouth set. "Nothing about her is normal." He said it like a fact, like a classification. The kind used to justify anything that followed. Kael slid the vial closer to me across the table. "Drink." I stared at it. The room felt too still, as if even the stone listened. The silver beneath my skin stirred, not bright yet. Dusk wasn't full night, but aware. "I've been compliant," I said carefully. "Daily injections. No incidents. No attempts to leave. What is this for?" Kael's gaze lifted to my face at last. "To see how much control you have." I didn't look away. "And if I don't drink it?" Kael's expression didn't change, but the air around him did, a subtle pressure that made my shoulders want to fold. "Then I stop asking." Rowan's voice came quiet and sharp. KL. Kale's eyes flicked to him. You want honesty? Fine. If her mark can command wolves, I will know the limits before someone else forces the discovery in public. Rowan turned his head toward me. Don't lie! The words weren't a warning. They were an instruction, and it bothered me more than Kael's threats, because Rowan's version of control wore the face of reason. I don't know what you think I'm hiding, I said. Rowan's eyes held steady. How it feels when the moon rises. What you hear. What you want to do. My mouth went dry. Want was dangerous. Want could be used. Kael tapped the vial once with 2 fingers. Drink. I didn't reach for it. I breathed slowly, deliberately. Not to control them, only to control myself. My body had learned that panic made my hands clumsy, my words fragile. Calm kept me intact. Inhale. Exhale. The faint silver warmth in my collarbone responded the way it always did to my attempt at stillness, like it recognized the rhythm. The air in the chamber shifted, almost imperceptible, as if the room itself adjusted around my breath. Kael's gaze narrowed. Rowan's eyes sharpened, catching the change before Kael could name it. I took another slow breath because I had no other safe action. Kael's fingers tightened on the edge of the table, and then it happened so fast my mind didn't catch up until my eyes did. Kael's posture faltered. Not in weakness. Kael didn't do weakness, but in interruption, as if an invisible hand had caught the back of his neck and pulled. His shoulders dipped a fraction. His jaw clenched hard enough that the muscle jumped. Rowan moved a step forward, sudden, alert. Kael's breath hitched. His eyes snapped to my collarbone, the place he could not stop watching. And for a heartbeat, the silver under my skin surged, faint but immediate, answering the pressure in the room like a nerve touched wrong. Kael's knees bent. He caught himself mid-motion with brute force, fighting his own body as if it had betrayed him. But the fight cost him, visible in the flaring of his nostrils, the tight white line around his mouth. Then, like a man forced to surrender to gravity, he dropped to one knee. The sound of it was small, a dull thud on stone. The entire chamber seemed to inhale at once. Rowan stared, stunned in a way I hadn't seen from him yet, his mind racing to label what his eyes couldn't deny. I sat frozen, hands flat on my thighs, heart hammering so hard it made my collarbone ache. I hadn't moved. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't wanted this. Kael's head was bowed, but his eyes lifted, furious, straight to me. Not pleading, accusing, like I'd done it on purpose. I didn't... I started. Kael pushed himself upright in one brutal motion, the knee scraping stone, his hands fisting at his sides. He stood too close, towering over the table, shadow falling across me like a verdict. Rowan put a hand out, not touching Kael, just placing it between them in the air. Enough. Kael's voice came low, vibrating with restraint. You felt that. Rowan didn't blink. I saw it. Kael's gaze cut back to me. You are not going to do that again. My throat tightened. I don't know how I did it. Rowan's eyes narrowed. That's a lie, or it's dangerous ignorance? Which is it? Anger flared in me. Not hot, not reckless, cold, because both of them were trying to force my body into a narrative that served their control.
I breathed, I said. That's what I did. Because if I don't, I fall apart.
Kael's expression hardened further, as if the simplicity insulted him. Then you will not be alone when you breathe under moonrise. Rowan's gaze stayed on me, sharp. Tell us what you feel when it rises. Every detail. If you hide anything and it happens again in front of others, Kael cut in. If it happens again at all. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. You want honesty? Fine. The suppressants dull me in daylight. At night they fail. The mark warms. It responds to pressure, to attention. It feels like something waking under my skin. Rowan's eyes softened into focus again, like a man taking notes without ink. Does it speak? No. Kael's jaw clenched. It doesn't need to. He reached for the vial, then stopped, as if the act of forcing it into me now would feel like admitting defeat. Instead, he slid it back into his pocket. New rules, he said, turning his gaze to Rowan, as if this was the only language they shared cleanly. Double monitoring at night, Celine present, no unsupervised contact with staff, no more feasts, no more exposure. Rowan's eyes remained on me. And honesty from her. Kael looked at me one last time, eyes colder than the stone. You are not a person here. You are a risk. If you forget that, if you try to play power games, I don't have games, I said quietly. I have survival. Kael's mouth tightened as if he hated the word on my lips. Then survive within the rules. They escorted me back, the corridor quieter than usual, as if the fortress itself had heard the sound of a High King's knee hitting stone and didn't know where to put it. In my room, the door locked. I sat on the bed frame and held my hands in my lap until the shaking stopped. I hadn't wanted to bend Kael, but my body had done it anyway. And the look in his eyes afterward, the hatred, the shock, the sense of violation, told me what I needed to know. The mark didn't only mark me. It could move them. Kael's knee had hit stone without my permission, and the fury in his eyes afterward told me the truth. Whatever the moon wrote over my brand could reach into power and make it bow. Chapter 15. The Near Shift. Kael didn't sleep the next night. Neither did I. They moved me to a different room before dusk, a reinforced chamber closer to the inner keep, with iron-laced stone in the walls and a ring of faint grooves etched into the floor that reminded me too much of the punishment circle at Stonecrest. Celine waited inside with clean cloth, a bowl of water, and a face that tried to be blank. Bryn looked sick as he stepped away after locking the door from the outside. Rowan remained. Not in the room at first. In the corridor beyond the bars of the inner door, visible through a narrow slot of ironwork, close enough that I could hear him breathe when the hall went still. Kael came once, right before dark, fully settled. He did not speak to me. He spoke to Celine and Rowan like I was an object on a table. If she loses control, restrain her, he said. Do not let her reach the door. Do not let her... Rowan's voice cut in, controlled. She's not feral. Kael's gaze snapped to him. I watched a wolf bow in the pit. I watched my own body drop. I'm not taking chances. His eyes shifted to me, and something in his expression tightened. Not fear, exactly. Offense. Like the idea that his body could respond to anything outside his command was an insult he couldn't forgive. Kael left again without another word. The chamber grew colder as night deepened. Celine checked my pulse twice, fingers cool on my wrist. She said nothing, but her attention kept drifting to my collarbone as if she expected it to ignite. Rowan's voice came through the ironwork, low and steady. You don't have to fight it alone. I sat on the bed frame, hands gripping the edge hard enough to whiten my knuckles. You're not alone, I corrected. You're outside the door. I'm where Kael will allow me to be, Rowan said, and the faint bitterness in his tone made my stomach tighten. The moon rose. I felt it like a change in gravity. The silver under my skin warmed, then surged, and the familiar clarity pushed against the day's suppressant fog. My thoughts sharpened. My senses woke. The air smelled suddenly of iron and smoke and Celine's clean herbs. Then my bones began to ache. Not the brand. Deeper. My wrists throbbed. My spine tightened. A pressure built behind my eyes, as if my skull was too small for what wanted to wake inside it. I swallowed hard. Something's wrong. Celine stepped closer, lamp held low. Describe it. My breath came quicker despite my effort. My joints, my skin feels tight. Rowan's voice sharpened. Elara, look at me. I lifted my gaze toward the ironwork slot. Rowan's eyes were there, intent, anchoring. Not soft, not kind, focused. Breathe, he said. I tried. The ache worsened. Heat rushed through my limbs, then cold, then heat again, like my blood couldn't decide what it was meant to be. My hands curled, fingers stiffening, nails pressing against my palms. Celine reached for my wrist. Hold still! The silver flared under my collarbone, bright enough that Celine's lamp seemed useless. My skin prickled as if the light had teeth. Pain lanced through my shoulder. I gasped, body lurching forward off the bed frame. My knees hit the floor. Don't restrain her, Rowan snapped, voice cutting through the corridor. Not yet. Celine froze, hands hovering. The pressure in my spine built, terrifying in its steadiness. And for a moment I thought I would split in two. Human skin on one side, something larger and darker pushing through the other. My breath came in ragged pulls. I tasted copper. Rowan's voice lowered, urgent. Elara, stay here. Stay in your body. Tell me what you feel. I feel like I'm... My words broke as a tremor ran through my arms. Like I'm changing. Celine's face went pale. She didn't hide it this time. Nulls don't... Stop, Rowan said, and the command in his voice didn't land on me. It landed on Celine, on the room, on the air itself, forcing it into stillness. The ache crested. My fingers spasmed, and something sharp grazed my palm from the inside. I stared down,
breath caught. For a heartbeat, my nails looked too long. Not claws, not fully, but not human. Terror flooded me so hard, I nearly vomited. Rowan's eyes widened through the ironwork. His voice softened by a fraction. Not into comfort, but into control offered instead of taken.
Good. You're here. You're seeing it. Stay with me.
The silver burned under my collarbone. Not painful, but insistent, like a signal flaring into the night. I clutched the front of my dress, knuckles white. Make it stop. Rowan's throat worked. I can't. Celine's hands trembled as she lifted the damp cloth and pressed it to my forehead. The cold helped. A little, dragging me back from the edge. The pressure eased by degrees, not disappearing, but settling into something manageable. My breathing slowed enough that my vision cleared. I remained on my knees, sweat cooling on my skin. Rowan didn't move from the door. He watched me as if he'd just seen the world tilt slightly and was recalculating where all the weight would fall.
KL will lock you tighter after this,
he said quietly. I know, I whispered. Rowan's voice dropped lower.
and he'll try to force the answer out of you by pressure.
The silver warmed again, as if responding to his words. Rowan went still. Then he stepped forward, closer to the inner door. Elara? I lifted my face. He opened the inner door partway, not enough to enter fully, not enough to violate Kael's rule, but enough that his presence reached into the room like heat. He came to me slowly, stopping a careful distance away. The urge that rose in me wasn't romance. It was the body's hunger for grounding, for closeness, for something solid when your bones feel like they're rearranging themselves. Rowan knelt down, bringing his face level with mine.
Look at me,
he said again, and this time it landed deeper, steadier. I did. His gaze flicked to my hands, then back to my eyes.
You didn't choose this,
he said, voice rougher now.
but you can choose how you carry it.
My throat tightened. Choice doesn't matter if the moon... Choice matters. Rowan cut in softly. He lifted his hand, hesitated, then brushed his knuckles lightly against the air near my collarbone without touching skin. A question made into a near contact. The silver warmed, hungry. Rowan's breath caught. His eyes darkened with something dangerous. Not possession. Recognition of a pull he didn't want to obey. For a moment, he leaned closer. Drawn by instinct, he was fighting. His mouth hovered too near mine. My breath hitched, the world narrowing to the heat of him and the cold stone beneath my knees, and the silver under my skin rising like a tide. Rowan stopped. He shut his eyes for a fraction of a second, as if bracing against himself. Then he pulled back, voice low and steady again. The line snapped into place with effort.
Not until you can choose it,
he murmured.
Not the mark.
He stood and backed away, closing the inner door again like a man sealing himself away from temptation. I remained on the floor, shaking. My hands half changed, and then slowly, painfully returning to normal as the surge ebbed. The moon hung high beyond the tiny window, and under my collarbone, the silver pulsed. awake, impatient, as if it had tasted what I might become and wanted more. Rowan's mouth had nearly touched mine before he tore himself back and whispered, "Not until you can choose it, not the mark." And the silver under my brand answered like it hated being denied.
Chapter 16. The Trade. Cale took the near shift as proof of exactly what he'd already believed. He didn't call it a shift, not in words. He called it escalation. He called it instability. He called it time running out, as if the moon had started a countdown and Frosthold had to beat it to the end. The next day, the fortress shifted into a quieter kind of readiness. Not panic, preparation. Bryn avoided my eyes entirely. Celine spoke less and checked my collarbone more, her fingers careful as if touching history. The servants moved with a tightness in their shoulders, like rumor had seeped under doors and into stairwells. Rowan came once, just before dusk, and stood outside my room long enough that I knew it was him by the way the air changed. "They're moving you," he said through the door. My stomach dropped. "To where?" "Neutral ground," Rowan replied, and his voice held a restrained frustration that told me he'd argued and lost. "Verification. The moon trial schedule is being accelerated." My hands clenched in my lap. "Why now?" Rowan hesitated. "Because other packs heard the word moon and started demanding a look. Because Stonecrest is pushing. Because Kael thinks if he controls the stage, he controls the outcome." "And you?" I asked. A pause. Then honestly, "I think controlling the stage is the only thing keeping you alive." The honesty didn't comfort me. It just clarified the shape of my cage. That night, Kael entered my room without warning, the door swinging open like an announcement in itself. 2 guards followed, carrying travel bindings. Not the heavy cuffs, but leather straps meant to look dignified while still functioning as restraint. Kael's gaze went to my collarbone, then to my face. "We leave at dawn." I stood slowly. "So that's it. You trade me." Kael's eyes narrowed. "This is not a trade." I let a small silence hang, the kind that forces truth into the open. "You're handing me over." Kael's voice stayed flat. "Frosthold agreed to transfer you under escort to the Neutral Council site. They want verification. They want the mark assessed. They want to see if you are what rumor claims." "What rumor claims?" I repeated, tasting the words. Kael stepped closer. "You are an asset that draws predators. Here or there, they will come." "So you're moving the bait," I said quietly. The guards went rigid. Bryn, behind them, looked like he wanted to disappear into the stone. Kael's expression tightened into something almost like anger at being named accurately. "Watch your mouth." I held his gaze. "You told me I'm not a person here, so don't act offended when I speak like one." For a heartbeat, Kael's eyes flashed with something raw. Fury, yes, but also something like the memory of his own knee hitting stone. The violation he hadn't forgiven. Then his face smoothed again, the High King mask settling back into place. "This is happening," he said. "You will comply?" I didn't argue. Arguing would change nothing. It would only cost me control in front of men who were already measuring my reactions. Celine arrived before dawn, checking my pulse, my pupils, the warmth under the collarbone where the silver slept in daylight. She didn't meet my eyes as she whispered, "Eat," and placed bread in my hands. I did, forcing it down, as if survival were a ritual I could perform, even when my stomach revolted. When the fortress gates opened, cold air hit my face like a slap. The convoy waited outside, dark wagons, mounted guards, horses stamping in the frost. The road beyond lay pale and hard, leading away from stone walls that had been cage and shelter both. Rowan stood near the lead wagon, arms crossed, posture loose, but eyes fixed on me with that sharp steadiness. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His gaze held a message anyway. Stay present. Don't disappear inside fear. Kael appeared last, stepping into the open like the world belonged to him. He wore a heavy coat, sword at his hip, and an expression that belonged to battlefields. A captain approached him, speaking low. Kael nodded once, then turned his gaze to me. "Bring her," he said. The guards guided me forward. Leather straps were fastened around my wrists, tight enough to limit, loose enough to pretend I could move freely. A performance of dignity. As I stepped toward the wagon, the fortress behind me felt suddenly very far away, as if I'd already been handed over to whatever waited on the road. Bryn hovered near the gate, face pale. Celine stood with her hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes down. Tessa was nowhere visible, and that absence felt like a warning and a relief at once. I climbed into the wagon without being shoved, because Kael preferred compliance to force. The interior smelled of leather and cold wood. A small window slit offered a thin view of the gray world. The door was about to close when Kael's shadow fell across the opening. He leaned in just enough that his voice reached me alone, low and dangerous in its quiet. "If they touch you," he said, "I end a pack." The words weren't comfort. They were possession and threat braided together. A promise made with violence instead of tenderness. But beneath them, I heard something else, a refusal to let Crest reclaim the story they'd tried to finish with fire. The wagon door shut. The lock clicked. The convoy lurched forward, wheels crunching over frost, and the fortress began to recede behind me like a dark memory. I pressed my fingertips lightly to the ridge of the brand beneath my collar, and felt the faintest pulse of silver beneath it, steady as breath. They were moving me to be verified, weighed, named. They believed the road would make me smaller. But the mark under my skin didn't feel smaller. It felt impatient. As Frosthold vanished behind the turning wheels, Kael's promise, "If they touch you, I end a pack," rang in my bones, and the silver under my brand pulsed once, as if the road itself had just become a doorway. Chapter 17. Ambush on Neutral Ground. The road to neutral ground wasn't a road so much as a corridor cut through open land, wide enough for wagons, narrow enough for eyes. Frost clung to the grass like thin ash. The sky stayed the color of old steel, and every time the convoy creaked over a rise, I felt exposed in a way Frosthold's walls had almost made me forget. Inside the wagon, the leather restraints rubbed my wrists raw. 2 guards sat opposite me, boots braced, hands near their weapons, pretending they were bored. They weren't. Their attention kept drifting to my collarbone, as if the brand could suddenly leap off my skin and bite them.
We traveled hard. When night came, the silver under my brand woke and pushed against the day's dulling, sharpening my senses until I could smell smoke miles away and hear hoofbeats before they reached us. The guards noticed the change and spoke less. By mid-morning of the second day, the land flattened into a pale stretch of field, broken by a cluster of low buildings, stone, old and undecorated, the kind meant to outlast arguments. Neutral ground. The council site. The convoy slowed. I felt the moment before it happened, the way you feel a storm in your teeth. The horses ahead snorted, heads lifting. A rider's posture stiffened. Somewhere to the left, a bird screamed and fled. Then the first arrow struck the lead horse. The animal went down hard, screaming, and the wagon jolted as the line behind it tried to stop all at once. Shouts exploded. Steel rang against leather. The guards in my wagon surged toward the door. "Stay!" one started. The second arrow hit wood, thunking through the side panel inches from my shoulder. The first guard cursed and yanked the door open, leaping out. The other grabbed my arm. "Down!" I dropped to the floor as the wagon rocked again. Outside, chaos sharpened into sound, hooves skidding, men barking orders, the crack of arrows, the deeper growl of wolves too close to skin. The wagon door swung wide, and cold air slammed in with the smell of blood. I saw Kyle on horseback, moving along the line like he was built for battle, voice cutting through noise, pointing, directing, forcing order into panic by sheer will. Rowan moved differently, faster, weaving between wagons, his attention snapping to the places danger would appear next rather than where it already was. More arrows hit. One punched through a canvas cover. Someone screamed. A figure in dark cloth darted between wagons, too small to be a warrior, carrying a satchel. Head down. Human. A messenger, maybe. Or a servant attached to the council site who'd been unlucky enough to be outside. Another shadow lunged from the low grass toward that small figure, and the smell that hit me wasn't Frosthold. It was Stonecrest. My stomach dropped as understanding snapped into place. This wasn't a random raid. This was a retrieval. The second guard hauled me up by the elbow. "We're moving you back." "No," I said, and it surprised even me how steady my voice was. His eyes widened. "No, you do not." I didn't have time to argue with him. I didn't have time to be afraid properly. The small figure stumbled, turning, eyes wide with terror, and the attacker was already upon them. Wolf fast, teeth bared, a blade flashing in the fist of a man who wasn't bothering to stay human. The silver under my collarbone surged like something hearing its name. I shoved past the guard and threw myself out of the wagon. The ground hit hard under my boots. Cold air burned my throat. Arrows hissed overhead. The world narrowed to the distance between the attacker and the defenseless body about to be cut open. My restraints bit into my wrists as I ran. "Elara!" Rowan's voice snapped somewhere to my right, sharp with a fury I'd never heard from him. I didn't look. I didn't think. I breathed. Long inhale, longer exhale, the way I had in the feast hall, the way I had when my body tried to change under moonrise. The only control I'd learned that didn't require permission. The silver warmed in daylight, not bright, not glowing, but present, taut beneath my skin like a drawn thread.
The attacker lunged. I reached the small figure first and shoved them behind me, turning my body into a shield because I didn't have steel, didn't have claws, didn't have anything except stubborn flesh. The attacker's eyes flicked to my collarbone. His expression shifted. Recognition first, then hunger. "Null!" he spat and raised his blade. Something in me snapped into focus so cleanly it felt like cold water. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I exhaled slowly and held his gaze. The air between us thickened, subtle as a pressure change. His arm jerked mid-swing, as if a string had tightened around his wrist. His eyes widened, confused, then angry, trying to force movement through resistance his body didn't understand. Behind him, wolves, men in the process of shifting, hesitated, their motions stalling for a heartbeat, like they'd heard a command without sound. Rowan appeared to my right in a blur of movement, blade already drawn. He struck the attacker's arm hard enough to knock the weapon away, then drove him back with a brutal efficiency that left no room for debate. Kael's voice thundered from farther down the line. "Shield the wagons! Push them out!" The small figure behind me made a choking sound. "Please! Please!" "Run!" I said, without turning, and felt their trembling hand brush my back before they scrambled away. More figures spilled from the grass, some aiming for the wagons, some aiming for me. I stepped sideways, keeping myself between them and the scattered non-combatants near the council buildings, humans in plain coats, a pair of Omegas with travel packs who'd dropped to their knees in fear. They weren't part of this fight. They were simply in its path. The restraint straps on my wrists limited my reach, but not my stance. I took another slow breath and held still. The nearest attacker's pace faltered. His eyes flicked to my collarbone again, then to Rowan, then back to me, as if he couldn't decide which danger made more sense. Rowan snarled, a sound too close to his wolf to be polite, and drove forward. Kael's men surged as a unit, snapping into formation around the wagons. Steel flashed. Bodies collided. The attackers realized too late that Frosthold didn't break when surprised. It only got sharper. Someone tried to grab me from behind. I twisted, elbowing the grip away, and felt the silver under my skin tighten, pulling the air into a strange hush for a single heartbeat. The attacker froze just long enough for Rowan to slam him to the ground and put a blade at his throat. Rowan looked up at me, eyes dark, breathing hard. "Stay behind me." I shook my head once, small. "There are people." "I know," Rowan bit out. Then his gaze flicked past me to the cowering travelers near the buildings. His expression tightened. He didn't argue again. He moved, instead, placing himself where he could defend both me and them. When the last attacker broke and ran, the field fell into a ragged, stunned quiet. Bodies lay in the frost. Horses screamed softly. Men groaned. Arrows jutted from wood like ugly feathers. Frosthold's guards fanned out, securing the perimeter. I stood with my hands bound, breath steadying, blood roaring in my ears. My collarbone tingled, silver, warm under scar tissue, awakened daylight in a way it had never been before. The humans and Omegas I'd shielded stared at me as if I weren't supposed to exist. A woman in a plain coat, cheeks smeared with dirt, whispered to the Omega beside her. I didn't catch the first words. I caught the last. "Moon Queen." The whisper moved like wind through dry grass, soft and fast,
spreading from mouth to mouth. Rowan stepped in front of me, blocking some of the stairs. His voice came low, rough with restraint. "You just painted a target on yourself." I kept my gaze on the blood-dark frost and forced my breathing to stay even. "I know," I said, and that was the worst part. I hadn't meant to. When the chaos finally thinned, strangers kept staring past Frosthold steel at my bound hands and whispered a name I hadn't earned aloud. Moon Queen. Chapter 18. Lucian's private moment. They didn't let me see the wounded. Kael ordered me into a guarded room inside the nearest council building. A spare chamber with a single chair, a table, and a window barred more for symbol than necessity. 2 Frosthold guards stood outside the door. Bryn hovered like he'd been assigned to hold his breath until I stopped being a problem. My wrists remained strapped. Not because Kael feared I'd run, because he feared what would happen if I wasn't physically reminded of my place. Rowan came once, after the field had been cleared enough that voices stopped shouting and started speaking in the quieter tones used when everything has consequences. He checked my wrists without touching them, gaze flicking to the reddened skin. "Are you hurt?" "No," I said. Rowan's jaw tightened, as if the answer wasn't satisfying. "You stopped them." "I delayed them," I corrected. Rowan's eyes held mine for a long beat, and something unspoken passed between us. Approval, alarm, the uneasy recognition that I could move a fight without lifting a blade. Then he straightened. "Kael is meeting the council riders," he said. "They're demanding explanations." "Of course," I murmured. Rowan hesitated, then spoke in a voice made carefully neutral. "Stonecrest requested an audience." My stomach went cold. "With Kael." "With you," Rowan said. The room felt smaller immediately. "I'm not a person under their law," I said, tasting Lucian's words again like poison. "They're here under council protection," Rowan replied. "Kael can refuse a public meeting. A private one is easier to control." Easier to control. Everything in my life kept shrinking into that shape. Rowan's gaze sharpened. "You cannot touch him." "I know," I said, and surprised myself with how calm it sounded. Rowan watched me as if measuring whether my calm was real or only a thin cover stretched over shaking. "If you provoke them into calling you violent, they'll use it." I said, "I know," I repeated, quieter. "Tell Kael I'll speak." Rowan's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "You're sure?" No, but certainty wasn't required, only choice. "Let him come," I said. "I want to look at him when he tries to finish what he started." Rowan's gaze flicked to my collarbone. "Keep your breathing steady." He left. Minutes later, the door opened and Lucian Vale stepped in. Not Garrick, not a messenger. Lucian himself, wearing Stonecrest's colors like armor. Hair tied back, face clean, expression composed enough to pass for regret if you didn't know what regret actually cost. 2 council guards remained outside, visible through the open doorway. Their presence a reminder that even Kael's authority had edges here. Lucien's gaze went to my wrists first, bound, then to my collarbone, where the neckline of my dress revealed the ridge of the brand and the faint silver threading over it.
His eyes tightened. He closed the door partway behind him, leaving it cracked, enough to claim privacy. Not enough to risk being accused of something without witnesses nearby.
Elara, he said. Hearing my name from his mouth should have done something to me. Pain, rage, grief. Instead, it landed like a pebble on stone.
You shouldn't be here, I said.
Lucian's mouth twitched. Neither should you.
I stared at him. You did that. His gaze didn't flinch away from my collarbone. I did what I was told. The excuse slid out too easily. I wondered how often he'd practiced it in his head. I let silence stretch, because silence made people fill gaps.
Lucian's eyes lifted to mine. They're going to make a spectacle of you.
You mean the council, I said.
And Frosthold,
Lucian corrected, voice sharpening.
KL isn't keeping you because he cares. He's keeping you because you're valuable.
I almost smiled. You're telling me this like it's news.
Lucian's jaw tightened. I'm telling you because you're walking into something you can't survive by being stubborn.
Stubborn kept me breathing when you burned me, I said calmly. For the first time, his composure cracked. Just a hairline fracture. His eyes flickered, quick and guilty.
Why? I asked, not loudly, not pleading. Why brand me instead of exiling me quietly? Why erase me instead of letting me fade like you always wanted?
Lucian's gaze cut toward the cracked door as if checking who could hear, then back to me.
Because exile wasn't enough, he said, and his voice dropped. Not for you.
My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. For me. Lucian swallowed. Before the branding, your scent changed. I didn't answer. The silver under my skin warmed faintly, alert. Lucian's eyes went to my collarbone again. Not like heat, not like mating, like something old waking. The elders noticed. Luna Marin noticed. So, Marin had seen it first. Of course she had. The lawkeeper's eyes were trained for anything that didn't fit. Lucian's voice turned harsh, as if he hated the memory. They said if it completed, you would become ungovernable. I stared at him. So, you decided to make me nothing?
Lucian's hands flexed at his sides. They said the null brand would seal it.
Seal it. The word made my stomach drop, not because it explained the mark. It didn't, but because it reframed the cruelty into something colder than punishment. You didn't brand me to teach me a lesson, I said slowly. Lucian held my gaze. His voice came flat.
No.
The room seemed to tighten around us. You branded me, I said, forcing each word to stay calm, to contain me. Lucian's eyes did not deny it.
Yes.
I let that settle, not as absolution, as information. My wrists ached in their straps, skin rubbed raw, and the silver under my collarbone pulsed once, steady as a heartbeat that refused to be smothered. Lucian took a step closer, then stopped, as if afraid the air around me might bite. Elara, don't, I said quietly. He closed his mouth. I watched him the way you watch a blade on a table, without trusting it.
without looking away.
What did Luna Marin tell you? I asked. Not what you assume. What did she know?
Lucian hesitated. I held the silence until it forced him to fill it.
She said the moon doesn't choose softly,
he admitted.
She said if you were marked, you'd pull wolves to you like tide to shore. She said you'd break pacts.
I breathed in slowly and felt the silver tighten under my scar, not flaring, simply listening. Lucian's voice lowered further.
She said you would become a queen, whether anyone wanted you to or not.
A cold steadiness settled into my bones.
Not triumph, not joy.
Clarity.
Lucian's eyes flicked up, searching my face for something. Fear, maybe. Collapse. The satisfaction of knowing he'd won by breaking me.
He found neither.
You're done, I said.
Lucian's jaw clenched. They will kill you if you lash out.
I know, I said again. So watch.
He frowned. I leaned forward slightly in the chair, the straps biting my wrists, and fixed him with a gaze I'd learned in cages. Patient, unblinking, impossible to rush.
You came here to warn me, I said, or to soothe your conscience. I don't care which. What I needed was truth.
Lucian's face hardened. And now you have it.
Yes, I said, and my voice remained calm, even as my blood ran cold. Now I know the brand wasn't meant to end me.
Lucian stared. It was meant to keep something unfinished. I continued softly. So thank you for confirming what my skin already knew.
For a heartbeat, Lucian looked almost afraid. Then he turned sharply and opened the door wider, stepping into the corridor where council guards could see him again. The mask slid back into place.
He didn't look back when he left. The door shut.
I sat very still until my breathing steadied again, because I could feel how close my body was to shaking. Containment.
That was the word.
Not punishment. Not exile.
Containment meant I was never meant to disappear.
I was meant to be controlled.
And the fact that the silver had formed anyway meant their control had failed. Lucian's voice had been flat when he finally said it.
The brand wasn't punishment. It was containment.
And the silver under my scar pulsed once, as if agreeing.
Chapter 19. The Council Circle.
They brought me to the council courtyard at noon. Daylight washed the stone clean, making everything look fairer than it was. The circle itself was carved into the ground, wide and shallow, old enough that the grooves had softened at the edges. Flags hung from poles around it, different colors, different sigils, each one claiming neutrality while daring the others to disrespect it.
Wolves gathered in rings beyond the carved line. Not a crowd like Stonecrest's square. This was a court made of predators with polished manners. Alphas, lieutenants, elders, lawkeepers. Humans with sealed scrolls and ink-stained fingers. Omegas standing behind stronger bodies like shadows allowed to exist only because they were useful. Frosthold's guard line stayed tight behind me. Kale walked at my left shoulder, presence like a wall. Rowan walked at my right, quieter, sharper, eyes sweeping the rings of watchers as if cataloging threats by scent and posture.
My wrists were unbound now, but only because the council demanded appearances. Bryn trailed behind, with a cloak folded over his arms, like a servant holding a leash he wasn't allowed to show. At the edge of the circle, Kael stopped.
"You will stand where they tell you,"
he murmured, not looking at me.
"You will speak only when addressed."
"And if they provoke me?" I asked quietly. Kael's mouth tightened. "Then you do nothing."
Rowan's gaze flicked toward me. "You breathe,"
he said under his breath, so low only I could hear.
"And you remember what they want."
They want a monster, I thought. I stepped into the circle. The stone under my boots felt colder than the air. I stood at the center mark and lifted my chin. A council speaker stepped forward, an elder with silver hair braided down her back, eyes sharp and mouth calm. She wore no pack color, only a neutral cloak and a seal at her throat. "Elara Voss," she said. The name rippled through the watchers. Some looked surprised that it was spoken at all. The elder's gaze dropped to my collarbone.
"Present the brand."
My fingers hesitated only a fraction before I lowered my neckline enough to reveal it. The ridge of the burn was healed into hard scar. The letters Null Omega sat there like a verdict carved into flesh. Over them, the silver threading lay faint in daylight, as if it preferred darkness. A murmur moved through the rings. A voice, male, rough with contempt, carried from the outer edge. "Stone Crest did the work for us." Another voice, older, colder.
"A null is not subject to council claim. It's already decided."
Kael's posture tightened, but he did not speak. Rowan's eyes narrowed, tracking the voices. The elder raised a hand, and the murmurs thinned. "Stonecrest's branding is noted. Frosthold's custody is noted. The council will determine whether an anomaly exists." Anomaly. The word fell between my ribs like a stone. A different council member stepped forward. A man with a lawkeeper's posture, seal rings on his fingers. He held a scroll open and read with the calmness of someone used to turning lives into clauses. "By long-standing statute," he said, "a branded null cannot hold rank, cannot claim territory, cannot lead wolves. A null cannot rule." The sentence was meant to be final. I felt it like a hand pressing down, not on my throat, on my place in the world. My breath tried to stutter. I forced it smooth, slow, deliberate. Inhale, exhale. The silver under my scar warmed faintly, as if the air itself had shifted around the words. The lawkeeper continued, voice steady. "Therefore, the council decrees she may submit to the moon trial under supervision to confirm whether the anomaly is real, or she may be executed as an uncontrolled risk." The rings around the circle went very quiet. All eyes settled on me like weight. I looked at Kael. His face was stone. His eyes were fire held behind it. I looked at Rowan. His jaw was tight, gaze steady, as if anchoring me to the idea that stillness could be a weapon. I turned back to the council. "I will submit," I said, and my voice carried farther than I expected in the open air. A ripple moved through the watchers. Approval, hunger, anticipation. The elder nodded once, satisfied.
Good. Then the trial will be held.
The lawkeeper's voice cut in, sharper.
Strip the cloak. Let all see the mark fully.
Bren stepped forward automatically, cloak ready, then froze when Kael's gaze snapped toward him. An unspoken order to wait.
Rowan's eyes narrowed.
I understood the demand for what it was. Not procedure, exposure, a chance to make me flinch in public. I didn't flinch. I lifted my hands and lowered the neckline further on my own, baring the scar to daylight. The air went still. The silver threading over the letters didn't merely sit there faintly anymore. It heated. A sensation like sunlight turning into fire ran under my skin. The silver lines brightened, not with moonlight, but with something that answered defiance, scrutiny, the weight of law trying to crush a body into compliance.
The watchers leaned in without meaning to.
The lawkeeper's mouth parted slightly. The silver surged, brighter, cleaner, until it looked like a living seam of light stitched over the brand. In full daylight, a collective inhale swept the circle. The elder's eyes widened a fraction before she recovered. And the lawkeeper, who had just declared I could not rule, went very still, staring at my collarbone as if the law had spoken back. The council's voice had been absolute. Annul, cannot rule. And then, in daylight, the moon mark burned silver over my scar, as if the sentence had been answered. Chapter 20. The Moon Trial. They didn't wait for another day. The council speaker's widened eyes became a mask again in less than a breath, and the lawkeeper, who'd declared I could not rule, snapped his scroll shut, as if the paper had offended him.
By council authority, the elder announced, voice carrying over the rings of bodies. The moon trial will be held at moonrise.
A murmur rippled outward, approval from some, fear from others, hunger from the worst of them. Kael's presence tightened at my side like a wall turning into a shield. Rowan didn't move, but his attention sharpened until I could feel it, like a blade angled toward every mouth that whispered too greedily. They led me out of the circle and into one of the council buildings again, not as a prisoner exactly, not as a guest either. A thing in transit. A problem held in a room until the next public decision could be made. As dusk thickened, more arrived. Wagons, riders, wolves from packs I didn't know by color, but knew by scent. Citrus and smoke, wet earth and iron, cold pine, sweet rot. Their gazes kept finding my collarbone as if it were a compass, as if the silver would point them toward a future they wanted to own. Celine came with a bowl of water and a cloth and touched the edge of my scar with careful fingers. Her face remained blank, but her eyes kept lifting toward the window, measuring the darkening sky. "They won't let you drink any suppressant tonight," she whispered, barely moving her mouth. "They want it raw."
Of course they did.
Rowan appeared at the doorway just before moonrise, and for the first time since we'd left Frosthold, his composure looked strained, controlled, but strained, like something in him was being pulled in opposite directions. "You don't have to fight it," he said quietly. Kael's voice came from the corridor behind him. "She does." Rowan didn't turn his head.
She's not a beast to be broken.
Kael stepped into the doorway, and the room felt smaller immediately. He didn't look at Celine. He didn't look at the cloth, the water, the small human attempts at preparation. He looked at my collarbone. "You will stand," he said. "You will endure, and you will not embarrass Frosthold." I should have been offended. Instead, I felt something cold and steady settle into place. "I'm not a banner," I said. Kale's gaze lifted to my face. "No," he agreed, voice flat. "You're a fault line." The words followed me as they escorted me back into the courtyard. The council circle was lit by torches now, their flames bending in the night wind. Wolves formed rings again, thicker than before. Even the humans stood farther back, clustered near the buildings like they sensed they were too soft to be close when wolves began to answer whatever the moon demanded. At the edge of the circle, the elder raised her hand. "Elara Voss!" she called. I stepped into the carved line alone this time. The air felt different at night, charged, expectant, like the world held its breath. The lawkeeper stepped forward again, scroll in hand, but his voice was less absolute now. "The trial will confirm whether an anomaly exists. If it does, the council will decide how it is contained." Contained. Lucian's word delivered again through a different mouth. My scar warmed under my dress like it could hear. The elder's gaze stayed on my collarbone. "Stand still. Do not speak. Do not provoke." As if I'd come here to provoke. As if I had any interest in turning this into theater. The moon rose. I felt it the way I'd felt it in the reinforced room at Frosthold, the way I'd felt it in the grass when arrows flew, the shift in gravity, the tightening under my skin, the silver waking with impatient purpose. Heat threaded through my scar, then through my ribs, then deeper, into my bones. My hands trembled once before I could stop them. I forced them still at my sides. "Breathe," Rowan had said. "Keep your breath steady." I inhaled slowly. The air tasted of smoke and wolf and cold stone. I exhaled longer than the inhale, letting my shoulders drop by a fraction. The silver surged. This time, there was no wall. No iron-laced stone to hold it. No fortress corridor to swallow the sound of my heartbeat. The light broke through the neckline of my dress like liquid metal. The lines over the brand brightened, spreading outward in a pattern that made the old letters look suddenly small and clumsy, like a childish scrawl beneath a language older than law. A murmur rose from the rings, sharp, involuntary. The lawkeeper's scroll slipped in his fingers. Pain lanced through my spine, and for a heartbeat, my vision blurred. My body tried to change again, tried to make room for something larger, stronger, less breakable. Fear surged. Hot. Immediate. Then, underneath it, something steadier rose. Not courage, not defiance, a sense of alignment, like my breath and the moon and the silver under my skin were suddenly part of the same tide. I stopped trying to clamp down on it. I let it move through me. The moment I surrendered, the courtyard changed. It was subtle at first, heads lifting, nostrils flaring, wolves across pack lines reacting as if the air had become thick with scent. Then the first wolf dropped. A big alpha in a dark cloak, jaw clenched, eyes wide with rage as his knees hit stone. He tried to rise, muscles straining, but his body refused him. A second fell, then a third. A wave moved outward through the rings like wind through tall grass, one after another. Wolves sinking to their knees, heads lowering.
hands bracing on thighs, as if their own bodies had decided the posture before their minds could object. Gasps scattered among the humans. The council speaker's eyes widened again, and this time she didn't recover fast enough to hide it. I stood at the center of the circle, breath steady, silver burning over my scar, watching wolves who had never bowed to anyone fold like they'd been written into the same sentence. Kael's breath hitched. I turned my head slightly and saw him, High King Kael, built of control and stone, fighting his own knees as they bent. His jaw clenched hard enough that I could see the tension in his throat, but his body dropped anyway, one knee striking the ground with a sound that echoed like a verdict. Rowan's gaze met mine across the circle for a heartbeat. Shock and something darker, something almost reverent. And then he too sank, controlled but unavoidable, lowering as if gravity itself had shifted around me. The sight of them kneeling punched the air from my lungs. I didn't want this. I didn't want anyone kneeling. But the mark didn't ask what I wanted. It simply moved through me, steady as tide. All around the circle, wolves stayed bowed. In the torchlight, I heard the first whisper, soft, shaken, impossible to stop once it started. Moon Queen. And this time, it wasn't only strangers saying it. The kneeling spread beyond Frosthold until the courtyard looked like a storm had flattened every pack at once, and I stood alone in the middle, realizing the world had just learned it could be made to bow. Chapter 21. The Kings Choose. The council tried to turn the kneeling into procedure. They spoke quickly, over one another, issuing phrases meant to frame what had happened as something manageable, an event, an occurrence, an anomaly confirmed. The elder's voice sharpened, ordering the rings to rise. Some wolves managed it, trembling. Others stayed down, faces tight with humiliation, their bodies slow to obey their own pride. The air remained taut, as if the silver in my skin had woven a thread between us all that refused to snap cleanly. I kept breathing, not because I wanted to command them again, because if I stopped, I wasn't sure what my body would do. Kael rose last, every movement disciplined, but the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. Fury at the council for witnessing his weakness, fury at himself for having it, fury at me for existing as the cause. Rowan rose beside him with less visible anger and more calculation, gaze sweeping the rings as if already anticipating the shapes of the fights that would follow. The lawkeeper stepped forward, face pale beneath his authority. "The trial confirms." A voice cut across the circle before he could finish. "Claim her!" It came from the outer ring, from a pack leader with a heavy gold clasp at his throat. His eyes shone with the ugly brightness of desire dressed as politics. "If she bends wolves, she belongs under council leash." Another voice answered, sharper. "Under pack leash. She's not council property." Voices rose, overlapping, turning into the beginning of a feeding frenzy disguised as debate. Wolves shifted their weight, nostrils flaring, instincts waking under law. My stomach tightened. This was the moment that could become a riot, a grab, a public tearing apart of anything that didn't have walls around it. Kael stepped into the circle without permission. His voice cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. "Enough!" The courtyard didn't fully quiet, but the sound thinned. Eyes turned, bodies adjusted around his presence instinctively.
He didn't look at the council speaker first. He looked at the rings of Pact leaders.
She is under Frosthold custody, Kale said. No one touches her.
The gold-clasped leader smiled thinly.
Custody doesn't mean ownership, High King.
Kale's gaze turned colder.
Touching her would mean war.
The word landed hard enough that even the hunger-backed whispers faltered. Rowan moved into the circle as well, half a step behind Kale, but angled slightly toward me. A quiet shield I hadn't asked for. He didn't speak right away. He let Kale's threat settle. Then he spoke to the council speaker, voice calm as iron.
You called this neutral ground. Prove it. If you allow a grab in your circle, your neutrality dies here.
The elder's jaw tightened. She lifted her hand again, and this time her voice carried a command that wasn't only ceremonial. Stand down. The rings shifted, reluctant but contained. I realized, with a cold clarity, that my survival was now balanced on the council's desire to appear lawful and Frosthold's willingness to start a war. Neither was a comforting foundation. The elder's gaze returned to me.
Elara Voss, the trial has confirmed the anomaly. By council statute.
Kael's voice cut in again, softer now, but no less absolute.
By older precedent.
The elder's eyes narrowed.
High King!
Rowan spoke, and his tone made the courtyard listen in a different way. If the moon has marked her, she will be hunted, claimed or killed. The only thing that prevents bloodshed is clarity. Clarity, Kael echoed, and for the first time his gaze flicked to me, not as a risk to be managed, but as a center of gravity the world had begun to orbit. So we provide it. My throat tightened.
Provide what?
Kael turned to the council speaker.
We invoke the ancient safeguard.
Murmurs rose again. Nervous, angry. The elder's mouth tightened.
Binding oaths?
Rowan's gaze held steady. Yes. I understood then. They weren't only protecting me. They were locking themselves to me in a way that would be visible, undeniable, and dangerous. The council speaker hesitated, then nodded once, sharp.
If you invoke it, you accept the consequences.
Kael didn't blink.
We already have.
They brought a stone basin into the circle and placed it at my feet. A blade followed, clean, ceremonial, too small for combat and too sharp for comfort. The elder's voice carried. The oath binds blood to witness. It cannot be broken without ruin. Kael stepped forward first and without ceremony drew a line across his palm. Dark red liquid welled up immediately. He didn't flinch. Rowan did the same, jaw clenched, eyes never leaving the rings of watchers as if daring any of them to move. They held their bleeding hands over the stone basin, letting the blood drip. The smell hit the air. Iron, power, promise. Then Kael turned to me. For a heartbeat, I thought he would demand me to do the same. Bind me as thoroughly as he was binding himself. Instead, he lowered his bleeding hand to the stone and spoke loud enough that every pack leader heard.
We do not claim her as property, Kael said.
Rowan's voice joined his, steady and fierce.
We crown her.
The words slammed into the courtyard like a door being kicked open. Silence followed, thick, Stunned, hungry silence. The elder's eyes widened a fraction.
Crown? Kael's gaze swept the rings. You want her leashed. You want her owned. Frosthold refuses. She will not be traded between hands like a prize.
Rowan's eyes turned toward me then, and the sharpness in them softened into something more dangerous than gentleness. Something like loyalty that had been chosen, not compelled. If the moon has marked her, then the mark will not be used as an excuse to take her consent. My throat tightened. Consent. Choice. Words I'd learned to treat like fragile things. The elder spoke, voice cautious now.
And what does she choose?
Every eye turned to me. I felt the silver under my scar warm, patient. I forced my breath steady and lifted my chin. I choose to live, I said. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of peace. It was the only honest sentence that didn't hand my throat to the wolves around me. Kael's jaw tightened, as if my answer satisfied him and enraged him at the same time.
Rowan held still, gaze locked on mine, as if he understood exactly how much it cost to say even that.
The courtyard remained silent for a heartbeat longer.
Then, from the outer ring, the gold-clasped leader's voice came again, quieter now, edged with menace. Crowning her makes enemies, High Kings.
Kael's eyes turned to him like a winter storm. Let them come. With blood still dripping into the stone basin, Kael and Rowan stood at my sides and swore. We don't claim her as property. We crown her. And I felt the circle shift from judgment into war. Chapter 22. Counter Coup Attempt. War didn't announce itself with banners. It arrived as a hand reaching for a throat when everyone was still pretending to follow rules. They moved me from the courtyard into the council building under a tighter escort. Frosthold guards forming a living wall, Kael at the front, Rowan at my shoulder. The hallways were crowded now with delegates and messengers, bodies pressing close, eyes bright with calculation. Every step felt like walking through teeth. Celine appeared near a doorway, face pale beneath her healer mask. She caught my gaze for a heartbeat and shook her head once. Small. Danger. I didn't ask. I didn't need explanation. My body already knew. My skin prickled, the silver under my scar humming faintly even in daylight, like a low note held under speech. We reached a long corridor lined with windows. Sunlight poured in, turning the stone almost warm. Too open. Too exposed. Kael's pace slowed a fraction. Rowan's gaze swept the windows, the ceiling beams, the doorways, and then the air changed, the way it had on the road before the first arrow struck. I inhaled and tasted it. Oil, metal, a sharp, unfamiliar scent threaded with something sweet meant to distract. My head turned without permission toward the nearest window. A figure stood on the outer ledge beyond the glass. Impossible unless they'd climbed like a shadow. Their arm lifted. A crossbow. The world narrowed to the black point aimed directly at my chest. Rowan moved first. He shoved me sideways hard enough that my shoulder slammed the stone wall, pain sparking down my arm. The bolt shattered the window behind where I'd been standing, sending glass exploding inward like bright rain. Kael lunged forward with a snarl that was half wolf,
half rage, and grabbed a guard's shield, yanking it up as another bolt whistled through. People screamed. Bodies surged. The corridor became chaos. Delegates ducking, guards shouting, boots pounding. I hit the floor hard, breath knocked out of me. My palms slid on stone dust and glittering glass. Someone grabbed my ankle. Not Rowan, not Kael. A hand too small, desperate, pulling. I twisted and saw an Omega, young, trembling, eyes wide, face streaked with tears. Not an attacker, a pawn. A body shoved into the corridor at the exact moment to create confusion and hands in the wrong places. "Please," she gasped, voice breaking. They said if I got you." Her words snapped off as a larger shadow surged from the crowd, aiming for me, blade low, moving with the certainty of someone who believed the chaos would hide the act. The silver under my scar surged. Not moonbright, but fierce, fast, answering threat the way it answered scrutiny. My lungs burned. My throat tasted blood where my teeth had cut my lip. I breathed anyway. Inhale, exhale. The air thickened. The attacker's stride broke mid-step. His knees buckled as if the floor had turned to water. His blade clattered on stone. Around him, 3 other bodies, wolves from different packs, moving too purposefully through panic. Stopped like strings had been yanked. They dropped. Not all the delegates, not all the guards. Only the ones who had been moving with that specific hunger. Rowan slammed into the nearest assassin, wrenching him down and pinning him with brutal precision. Kael's hand closed around another man's throat and slammed him into the wall hard enough to crack stone dust loose, then released him only to let guards take him in chains. The Omega who had grabbed my ankle stared at me, trembling, as if she couldn't understand why her body was still allowed to move when the men around her couldn't. I pushed myself up onto one elbow and caught her wrist gently. Gentle, because she was shaking like a leaf and because her fear smelled real. "Breathe," I told her, voice low. "It's done." She sobbed once, silent, shoulders caving. Rowan's eyes snapped to me. "Elara." "I'm here," I said, forcing air into my lungs. My collarbone burned hot beneath the neckline, silver threading bright enough that people who should have been looking away couldn't. Kael's gaze cut toward the pinned attackers, then to the shattered window, then to the crowd as if mapping every potential angle of assault.
"They'll try again,"
he growled. The corridor echoed with voices now. Council guards rushing in, delegates shouting accusations, Frosthold men barking orders. The assassins struggled weakly against the invisible pressure holding them down. Their faces twisted in humiliation and fear. The council speaker arrived with 2 lawkeepers at her side, cloak billowing as she strode into the wreckage. Her gaze went from the shattered glass to the men on their knees to my collarbone glowing in daylight. "What is this?" she demanded. "A coup," Rowan said, voice cold. "Inside your neutral halls." Kael's tone was a blade. "Find who ordered it." The elder's eyes narrowed. "And the pressure? The kneeling? This is her doing?" I met her gaze from the floor, then slowly rose to my feet, ignoring the sting of glass in my palm. "I didn't tell them to attack," I said, voice steady. "But yes, When they moved for me, their bodies stopped listening to them.
The elder's mouth tightened. Her gaze flicked to the pinned attackers.
Names.
Rowan hauled one of them upright by the collar. The man's eyes darted wild. Kale stepped in close enough that the man's courage folded.
Who paid you?
He asked. The assassin's jaw clenched. Then his eyes slid toward the ring on one of the council lawkeeper's fingers. Subtle, almost nothing, but it was enough. The elder followed the glance. Her gaze hardened.
Take them.
Council guards surged forward. The lawkeeper stepped back, face tight.
You have no proof.
I felt the edge of my hidden papers against my skin beneath my dress. Thin, folded, tucked into the inner seam the way Celine had once taught a frightened Omega to hide a ration token. Leverage, Rowan's earlier offer. Celine's names, Tessa's stolen copy. All of it had been waiting for a moment when truth could be thrown like a blade. I looked at the elder. I do, I said. Kael's head snapped toward me. Rowan's gaze sharpened. The elder's eyes narrowed.
Speak.
My fingers trembled once as I reached inside the seam and pulled out the folded slip, the copied ledger note, edges worn from being pressed against my body through travel and fear. I held it out, palm up, like an offering and a threat. The elder took it, eyes scanning quickly. Her face changed, not dramatically, the way a judge's face changes when a witness says the one sentence that can't be unsaid. The elder looked up slowly. Counterfeit null branding, she read aloud, voice carrying down the corridor. Punishment, capital. A hush spread through the delegates closest to us, the kind of hush that meant everyone understood the word capital. The council lawkeeper, who'd stepped back, went very still. Kael's gaze turned dangerous. Where did you get that?
My brand,
I said, and my voice stayed even because evenness was a weapon now. And the records that describe what a lawful one requires. Rowan's eyes narrowed. Stonecrest. I didn't say the name immediately. I let the silence pressure the room into the shape of the truth. Then I nodded once. Stonecrest branded me under law. They didn't have the right to use. The elder's gaze went razor sharp.
If this is verified,
Kael's voice cut in, low and lethal. It will be. The corridor was no longer chaos. It was a courtroom with blood under its nails. The assassins were dragged away in chains, still trembling under the invisible weight that kept their bodies from rising too fast. Delegates backed away from me as if my skin carried heat. The Omega pawn stood near the wall, shaking, eyes darting between Kael and Rowan and me, like she didn't know which predator would bite. I stepped toward her carefully, not because I was kind, but because I understood what being used felt like. Your name? I asked. Her lips trembled. Mira. I nodded, filing it away the way Celine had taught me to file names. Like they were living things, worth not losing. Behind me, the elder's voice rose, sharp and official. Seal the halls. Summon Stonecrest's envoys. No one leaves until we know whose law was broken. Kael's gaze stayed on the corridor's far end, already anticipating retaliation. Rowan stepped closer to my shoulder, voice low enough that only I could hear.
You just turned their assassination into an indictment.
I swallowed, feeling the silver under my scar still humming, still hot. They tried to end me, I murmured. So I'm going to make them answer. As council guards sealed the doors and the word capital spread like fire through the halls, I realized the brand on my collarbone wasn't only a mark. It was evidence, and now the entire world was going to read it. Chapter 23. The First Law of the New Queen. They tried to keep the proceedings behind closed doors after the assassination attempt, but neutrality doesn't survive secrecy. The council halls had too many mouths, too many messengers, too many wolves who could smell fear turning into opportunity. By nightfall, the courtyard circle filled again.
Not with celebration, with pressure. Stonecrest's envoys were dragged into the open under guard, their polished composure fraying at the edges. The council speaker sat at the head of a raised dais with her elders, seals glinting under torchlight. Kael and Rowan stood below, flanking the circle like two blades laid across the same map.
And I stood at the center.
Not because I wanted the stage, because if I didn't occupy it, someone else would occupy me.
The elder held up the copied ledger note, then other documents the council had pulled from its own restricted vaults. Verifications, seals, iron specifications, witness requirements. The kind of proof that made liars sweat even before accusations landed.
Stonecrest,
the elder said, voice hard.
Did you commission a registered brandsmith under council seal to apply a null brand to Elara Voss?
Garrick's face tightened. He glanced once toward the Stonecrest lawkeeper in the delegation. Luna Marin Vale herself, robes crisp, chin lifted, eyes cold enough to make the torches feel dim. She didn't look at me. She looked past me, like I was an inconvenience the world kept refusing to dispose of.
Garrick cleared his throat.
Stonecrest acted under internal authority. Answer the question,
the elder snapped. Marin's voice cut in, smooth and precise.
The girl was a threat.
A murmur surged. Kael's posture tightened, and Rowan's gaze went razor sharp.
The elder's eyes narrowed.
A threat does not authorize counterfeit law.
Marin's mouth curved slightly, as if she found the council's outrage naive.
Law exists to contain what would break pacts. Contain.
The word moved through the circle like poison. I felt the silver under my scar warm, steady as a held breath. The elder's voice sharpened.
Counterfeit null branding is a capital offense.
Marin's eyes finally flicked toward me, quick and assessing. Then do what you must.
It was the first time I saw it clearly. She wasn't afraid of punishment.
She believed she was right.
The elder turned, gaze hard toward the circle of pack leaders. By council statute, Stonecrest must submit to judgment and reparations. Their alpha heir is summoned for testimony.
A ripple of satisfaction rose among some, outrage among others, hunger among the worst.
I watched it all and felt something strange settle inside me. Quiet, heavy purpose. Because punishment alone wouldn't fix the thing that had made the brand possible.
They could execute a lawkeeper and still keep the tool. They could sentence a pack and still leave a loophole wide enough for another girl to fall through.
The elder lifted her hand toward me. Elara Voss, you have been wronged under false law. The council recognizes... Rowan's voice came low at my shoulder. This is your moment to define what they can do with you.
Kael didn't speak, but I felt his attention like a weight, waiting to see whether I would demand blood or beg for safety. I lifted my chin. I don't want reparations, I said.
The courtyard quieted, stunned.
Marin's mouth tightened in faint confusion. The elder frowned.
You are entitled.
I'm entitled to a name I can keep, I said, voice steady. And a rule that can't be used to erase someone else the way I was erased. A murmur moved, uncertain. I continued, because if I stopped, they would fill the space with their own needs. Null branding ends. Everywhere. The elder's eyes widened a fraction. That is a broad decree. It's a weapon, I said, and weapons don't care who holds them, only who bleeds. Kael's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked at me like I'd surprised him in a way he respected and hated at once. Rowan's gaze stayed on me, intent, as if he'd been waiting to see whether I would use power to punish or power to change the ground it stood on. The elder hesitated, then looked out toward the rings of leaders. Pack heads, you will respond. Voices rose, immediate, political. Some protested, tradition, deterrence, order. Others murmured agreement. Too many nulls, too much quiet cruelty, too many convenient erasures. I listened to the noise and felt the silver under my scar tighten. Not flaring, not commanding, just present. When the elder raised her hand again, the courtyard quieted as if the air itself had decided it was time. By council authority, she said slowly, null branding is suspended pending full abolition vote by the pack heads. Suspended, a half measure dressed as progress. I tasted bitterness and kept it down. Half measures were how people survived while systems stayed intact. Kael's voice cut in, calm and lethal. Frosthold votes abolition. A shock ripple moved. Rowan followed without hesitation. Frosthold votes abolition. The elder's eyes narrowed slightly. 2 votes. A third voice rose from the ring, an older pack leader with scarred hands and tired eyes. I vote abolition. Then another, then another. The sound wasn't a cheer. It was something heavier, the shifting of a world that didn't want to admit how many girls it had burned. The elder's jaw tightened as she counted under her breath. By majority, she said at last, voice strained with the weight of what she was declaring. Null branding is abolished. Effective immediately. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe, not because I was happy, because grief came up like water. Grief for the girls who hadn't lived long enough to stand in a circle and demand this. I exhaled slowly and let it pass through me. Endurance, even now. The elder continued, voice firm again. Stonecrest is ordered to submit their branding tools and records for inspection. Their lawkeeper will be held under council guard pending sentencing. Their alpha heir will be summoned. Marin's face didn't change. Only her eyes sharpened, cold and focused on me. You've changed the board, her stare seemed to say. But the game isn't over. I held her gaze without blinking. After the circle dispersed, Celine found me near a corridor arch, hands tucked into her sleeves, expression controlled. You did it, she murmured. I started it, I corrected. Celine's eyes flicked to my collarbone. That's how it begins. A runner approached Kael with a sealed message, breathless. Kael read,
Then his gaze snapped to Rowan. Rowan's face tightened. I watched them exchange that silent, dangerous language and felt the silver under my scar stir, as if it recognized incoming trouble. Rowan turned toward me, voice low. "We have a report." My stomach tightened. "What kind?" Rowan hesitated, then spoke, careful. "Another mark." The words made the night feel suddenly colder. "Where?" I asked. Rowan's eyes held mine. "Far north. A servant girl, branded last month under a different pretext. She lit silver under moonrise." My throat went dry. The silver under my scar pulsed once, steady as a warning. As the council's decree echoed through the halls, null branding abolished, a report arrived of another silver mark waking far away. And I realized my story wasn't the only one the moon had begun to write. Chapter 24. Claim Without Chains. They gave me a room that night that wasn't a cell. No ironwork slot in the door. No double lock that clicked like a reminder. A real window, low enough to touch, looking out over frost-silvered fields beyond the council buildings. A fire burning low in the hearth. A basin of clean water. A blanket that smelled of cedar instead of stone. It felt like a gift. It wasn't. It was another way of saying the world had decided I was too valuable to treat badly in public. Kael and Rowan arrived after midnight, when the council corridors finally thinned and the last delegates found their beds. They entered without guards, but that didn't make it private in the way people meant when they used the word. Power didn't need witnesses to be present. Kael's coat was dusted with cold air. Rowan's hair was slightly damp, as if he'd washed blood off his hands and found none there. Only memory. Kael stood near the hearth, posture rigid. Rowan lingered closer to the window, gaze drifting to the moon outside, as if it were an enemy he refused to look away from for too long. Neither of them spoke at first. I watched them both and felt the silver under my scar warm faintly, alert to their proximity. Kael's voice broke the silence. "You changed council law." "I said words," I replied. They chose to listen. Kael's eyes cut to me. "They listened because they're afraid of you." The bluntness should have hurt. Instead, it clarified. "Yes," I said quietly. "They are." Rowan's gaze flicked toward my collarbone. "And now you're afraid of what they'll do with that fear." I didn't answer immediately, because answering would mean admitting the shape of my dread out loud. It wasn't only about knives or assassins or grabs in a corridor. It was about being turned into a symbol other people could parade while still keeping the cage. Kael stepped closer, stopping a careful distance away, as if he'd learned that proximity to me wasn't always his choice. "You are under Frosthold protection." "Protection," I repeated, tasting the word. Kael's mouth tightened. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Custody, then. Call it what you want. The result is the same. You are not alone." Rowan's voice came softer, but no less sharp. "Not alone can become another cage." Kael's gaze snapped to him. "I'm keeping her alive." "And you'll crush her to do it," Rowan shot back. The air tightened between them like a rope drawn hard. I held up a hand, not dramatic, simply firm. "Stop." Both of them went still. The silence that followed startled me more than their argument had.
Not because they obeyed, because their bodies recognized something in my tone and paused before their minds chose to.
The silver under my scar warmed, steady.
I lowered my hand slowly.
I'm not choosing between you, I said, voice even. And I'm not being fought over like I'm a territory line.
Kael's jaw clenched. Rowan's eyes held mine, intent.
I didn't ask to be marked, I continued. And I didn't ask to be crowned. But I'm here anyway. So we do this cleanly.
Kael's gaze narrowed. Cleanly? No chains, I said. No vows that turn my body into a prize. No, for your safety, that means I don't get to breathe without permission. Rowan's expression shifted. Approval, relief, something like gratitude held behind control. Kael's face stayed hard. And what do you offer in return? The question was pure Kael, negotiations as the only language he trusted. I met his gaze. Honesty? Kael's eyes flicked to my collarbone. Honesty won't stop others from trying to claim you. No, I agreed, but it will stop you from becoming one of them. Kael went very still.
Rowan's breath caught, subtle. I turned slightly toward Rowan.
And you, no bargains that require my fear. You don't get to be the gentler cage. Rowan's jaw tightened, then he nodded once.
Fair.
The fire popped softly in the hearth. Outside, moonlight slid over the frost, pale and steady. Kael stepped closer again, slower this time, and stopped within arm's reach. If we don't bind you, he said, voice low, they'll try to bind you.
I know, I said.
Kael's eyes searched my face as if looking for weakness he could protect by eliminating choice. He didn't find it. He exhaled, controlled. Then state it.
State what? I asked.
What you want, Kael said. In terms even the council can't twist. The words felt like a door, a small one, but real. I swallowed. My throat tightened around the weight of it. Then I spoke anyway.
I want to belong to myself, I said. And if I choose to stand with you, either of you, it will be because I choose it.
Rowan's gaze softened into something dangerous and steady. Then choose. When you're ready. Kael's expression didn't soften, but his posture shifted by a fraction, as if he'd accepted a rule he hated because it was the only one that would keep the thing he couldn't control from tearing everything apart. He lifted his hand, slow, and stopped it in the air near my collarbone without touching, mirroring Rowan's careful near contact from that night in Frosthold. Does it react when you're calm? He asked quietly. Yes, I admitted. And when I'm threatened. Kael's eyes narrowed. And when you want something.
Heat rose in my face, immediate and unwelcome.
Rowan's gaze flicked to Kael, sharp. I steadied my breath.
Sometimes.
Kael's hand hovered a breath longer, then withdrew. Then we agree, he said, voice rougher now. No chains, no forced claim, but you don't walk unguarded.
I didn't ask to walk unguarded, I replied. I asked not to be owned.
Rowan stepped closer, stopping just short of touching.
And the mark?
He asked softly.
What does it want?
I looked out the window at the moon,
bright and indifferent. "I don't know," I said. "But I know what it doesn't get to decide." My voice came steadier as I continued. "It doesn't get to decide my consent." Rowan's mouth tightened with something like respect. Kael's gaze held on me, and for the first time, the anger in it looked less like hatred and more like a man staring at a fire he couldn't put out and choosing not to step on it anyway. A quiet settled into the room. Uneasy. Real. Then the silver under my scar tightened suddenly, as if a thread had been plucked. I sucked in a breath. Both men went still. Heat surged across my collarbone, brighter than it had been since the trial. The silver lines that had been one pattern began to shift, separate, reorder. I stood quickly, fingers clutching the neckline of my dress. In the mirror across the room, I saw it clearly. The silver had split into 3 crescents, nested like phases of the moon, each one distinct, each one brighter than the last. Kael's breath hitched. Rowan's eyes widened, and for the first time his control cracked into pure shock. The crescents pulsed once, 1, 2, 3, like a signal cast into the night. Somewhere far beyond the council buildings, beyond the rings of sleeping packs and guarded roads, something answered. Not a voice. A sensation. Sharp. Distant and unmistakably alive. Like another silver thread tightening in response. My stomach dropped. My skin prickled. Rowan's voice came low, almost reverent. That wasn't for us. Kael's jaw clenched.
It's calling.
I stared at the 3 crescents burning on my skin and felt the world widen under my feet, like the ground I'd just won was only the first step on a much longer path. Outside, the moon hung high, pale and watchful. And under its light, the mark on my scar wasn't closing. It was opening. The moon mark split into 3 bright crescents on my collarbone, and somewhere in the distance, something answered back, as if the moon had just begun its next command.
You've just listened to a story from Rejected Omega Tales. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more.